Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Reptiles and Research. We are officially live with more than one person this time. So with us, we have Thomas Griffiths.
Hello.
And we have the one and only BeardieVet.
G'day.
Or Dr. Jonathan Howard. So I think what we'll start, guys, is we'll probably just start with just talking about reptile lighting in general, and like people probably want to be a bit more beardie related as well. So we'll just talk about it in general and then like bring it back to beardies as well, and then we'll just kind of delve into the new tech that we want to talk about today.
Sure.
Sounds good.
So with like what you see in captivity, Tom, what would you say is like the one major thing that we're getting wrong with lighting right now?
Flipping out, that's a big question.
Let's start strong.
Yeah, oh my god. For specifically bearded dragons, or are we talking reptiles as a whole? Sorry.
Both. I mean, it's all going wrong at the moment.
I think it changes depending on the species, because we see things like crested geckos not getting any lighting at all. Tortoises, I see a lot of combi bulbs or mercury vapor bulbs being used. Beardies, if we're going to touch on beardies, I think the main thing for me is a very dimmed down heat lamps and inadequate lighting, but mainly because the enclosures are too small. I think it's difficult to recommend quality lighting for an enclosure that is smaller really than 4x2x2. So your 40 gallons that they get sold in, it's really difficult to recommend anything that that isn't in those standard kits. Really, it's annoying, but that's my 2 pence, 5 cents, if you like.
Would you say the same, Jonathan?
Yeah, I would say adequate lighting. We're still the general consensus is that you have a heat lamp that started in beardies, a heat incandescent light. Years of practice has been, oh no, we're going to use a ceramic heat lamp and then a UV lamp to provide the visible light as well. So as that in other species, snakes, they're all kept in tubs, heat mats, stuff like that, basking lamps, not so common with the snakes. We don't have tortoises in Australia, so our ones were basically turtles. Even turtles, the good keepers are putting basking lights in. I used to put basking lights in with my turtles, and they would use it, and then obviously have the UV platform. But a lot of turtle keepers just in Australia just keep them in an aquarium, and that's it. They swim, they chuck food in, that's it. So, and sometimes they'll provide a UV light, but it's just full water most of the time, or and sometimes they can get out. So lighting, I think advancing is, we've always gone, okay, there's heat lamps, incandescent lamps, but we're realizing, what, incandescent lamps are good for infrared, but there's a whole bunch of lighting which the reptiles are using, which we're now working out. So
I think a lot of species, like the minimum that is just like placeholder is like an incandescent halogen and then like UV, and it's like done, because that's what's going to keep it alive. And it's those two failing that, like, something's probably likely to die. So with bearded dragons, obviously, like, as a bare minimum, was like, your halogen and then your UV, but that's only like bookending the entire spectrum. And it's like you got your UV and then you got your infrared, but everything else is missing. And I think that is on the increase. I think that, like, a lot of shops are now selling like Jungle Dawns. It's like 3 lights, or any other brand's LED, but like for visible light in there. I think it's slowly increasing, but there's so much more to go into, isn't it? And I think, like, behavior-wise and what you know from the wild and everything like that with bearded dragons as well, there's a lot missing currently, isn't there?
Yeah, I think, well, even the Jungle Dawn LEDs, I think that's more come about through people going bioactive rather than the reptiles are using it. They're like, oh, I need to grow plants, man. That's your bioactive. That's where it comes from. And then, I think now it's like, oh, hang on a second. We should start producing a lot more visible light for our reptiles as well. So I think it's more more people going, oh, I want to grow plants, rather than, okay, this is what the reptile needs as well. So.
Yeah, I pretty much agree with that. Yeah, it's and the idea of bookending the spectrum. If we look at average sunlight, for example, UVB, which is what we're doing with our T5s and things like UVB, is less than 1% of sunlight, less than 1%, it's less than 0.5% even. And infrared A, which is what you're getting with the incandescent lamps, and infrared B, both of those make up around 40% of the spectrum. So there's a whole, the rest of the spectrum that it is completely missed out. Yes, T5s or UVB lamps, yes, they do produce a little bit of visible light, and yes, heat lamps, the incandescent lamps, do provide a little bit of visible light, but it's really not in the levels that we see in the wild, in full sun, or even in the shade. I think we're going to talk about this a little bit later on, about how the current system is based around shade lighting, especially with the focusing zones and things like that. But even, if we look at shade levels of light, you can measure it in what's called lux, sort of caveats attached to that, obviously. But if you measure the lux in shade, you're looking at around 40,000 to around 60,000 lux, even higher. If you look at a T5 and a halogen together, you're getting 3,000, 4,000. So orders of magnitude less light.
Yeah, my is it Dr. Lux, a Dr. Meter? My Lux meter turned up yesterday. It's like everything's so dark. You don't realize, like, it just like I turned all the lights off in the room. I'm just playing with like the actual like light bulb in this room, and I'm like, it's like 80 lux. We're sat in the dark. It's so mad when you actually look at the values. You're like, oh my god! Like you think you walk into a bright room, and it's like these white daylight bulbs, and it's like, I feel like I'm in a cave now. I know the numbers.
You wonder why people who work in offices for 9 hours a day in office lighting, why they suffer from depression, why people get seasonal affective disorder in the winter, because they're in these dark spaces constantly, and it's just not bright. I know it feels bright because your eyes dilate, but it's not bright. You can get, I have these things, which is like hilariously, me who worked with lights all day has a thing that shines lights in your eye. You see it? It's like going blue on my eye. To me, it's like, I can't believe I'm having to do this. That's like a seasonal affective disorder thing. It's like, why am I having to do this? I recognize the irony. That's a medical device. It's insane.
Wow, that's how important it is. Yeah.
So that's a medical device to give you enough light, so what, you can sleep at night or something like that, or
it's supposed to like wake you up in the day and things like that. But it is unbelievable, the fact that we're having to do that for human beings because we've got chronic low light.
And we can just walk outside. So when you think of a reptile who is in that enclosure, who has no choice, and you are effectively in control of the sun, you realize how dark it is. So when you had so many clients, Jonathan, have you found that a lot of clients have anything more than a halogen and a UV, or is it typically pretty much just that?
No, it's pretty much that. There's
really,
yeah, and this is like, like, I think it's an advancement we're seeing. Like, even me 10 years ago, 5 years ago, oh yeah, halogen, UV, you're good.
Golden.
But now it's like, oh, hang on a second. No, we're advancing. We're knowing what we need to do now. So that's it. Like some people just provide their snakes with a red lamp, and that's all they ever need because they're a snake and they're not very smart, and you can just stick them in there and they're all good. So or a heat mat in a tub, like it's
worse.
Yeah, we're moving ahead now, and it's moving quick. I think even the last 5 years, we've gone, okay, we got UV sorted, well, pretty much sorted, and then now we're adding the extra lumens on top to realize, oh, hang on a sec, we need other things, stronger UVA, stuff like that. So, so it is, there's a lot to go ahead. There's a lot of stuff cutting us out behind, like all the legislation cutting out all these incandescent globes and stuff like that. So, hopefully we can all shift forward in a big leap and bound with new technology, but also new knowledge. So
absolutely, I think also recognition of like what the level is that most people operate at. I think your recent survey, Tom, talking about like, do people know how to read graphs of like the spectrum and things like that, and people just don't. So if you talk about the electromagnetic spectrum of light, people don't even know what that means.
Exactly. Yeah, we're in a privileged position where we can say things like the spectrum, and we all have an idea of what that means. 99.9% of people have no idea what that means, and 99% of people are the average keeper. We're not the average keeper, and I'm not saying that in like a high horse way. I'm saying that in a we're very privileged to be in the position we're in, but also we as an organization or as a hobby need to constantly be aware of the fact that the people who are driving the advancement are often the people who, or in my opinion, are always the people who are more interested or more educated in that world through choice. And the average keeper isn't. If you go in Pets at Home in the UK or PetSmart in the US or anything like that, and you say, have you seen a spectral reading of this lamp? They'll look at you as if you're a talking banana. It's not.
Yeah, absolutely.
And that's not an offensive thing. That's just the truth, right? And that's what the survey shows, is that people do not know what these things mean, which is fine. We just need to take that into consideration when we're doing education or talking to people about things, even in general conversation or on Facebook groups or anything like that. I know there's a few admins in here.
When I used to work for Pets at Home, I was surprised, like, I had to explain to other staff members how to set up a Viv, and they would, the Exoterra hood.
Yes.
They would sell that with a wooden Viv for lighting. And I was like, this does not go together. What are we doing? What are we doing?
Yeah. And pet retail is very, very different, especially big box pet retail like that, because they've got things they have to do. They've got, and they're all understaffed and they're all underpaid, and there's fundamental systemic problems with the whole thing that we need to make it as easy as possible for those people, or for people shopping in those stores, to get what they need, without relying totally on Pets at Home's, not ideal.
Yeah.
Thing, if you like, I don't,
Yeah, but for a lot of them, that's their first contact. They're just like, they walk in there, get stuff, animal gets sick, then it sees me, and I say, you need this, 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 this. I send them back. The pet shop doesn't have that, so they sold me this, 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 and it's just like,
yeah.
I had one guy come back with multiple like bearded dragons with metabolic bone disease, because after he saw me, he went back, and then the pet shop said, oh, we don't have this, but this one will work. And they sold him like an LED light.
Yeah. Mind-blowing, isn't it? It is mind-blowing. Which is why I've always said that, well, I don't always say, but I try to always say that I think the brands should be held accountable, because they're the ones who unite all of us. They're the ones who unite the beginner keeper, the reptile, the vet, the shop. The brand is the one that we all encompass around. So they are, and they make a lot of money off us, right? So they should be responsible for making sure that all of the product is presented correctly, i.e. not putting UVA on the box of an infrared lamp.
Perhaps we should give we're talking about like people not knowing what the electromagnetic spectrum of light is. Maybe we should give a foundation, like a quick overarching foundation for people to move forward from, but all on the same point that we can move forward on talking about advancement in the tech in this live stream. So does anyone want to start trying to potentially give us a foundation of what the electromagnetic spectrum of light is?
Okay, Tom, you better do this one.
I did a little talk for giraffe keepers recently, and these are people that don't deal with light at all, right? They deal with giraffes. So I had to explain lighting to giraffe people. So I I'm not going to show the presentation, but how do I explain it visually whilst doing this with my hands? In its simplest form, we can split. We mainly want to focus on sunlight, so not necessarily the true full spectrum, because that includes things like X-rays and everything. In terms of the sunlight, we can measure with a device, and we can plot it on a graph, and we can section out that graph into different labels. And we do that. We label one section as UV, it's ultraviolet. We label one section as visible light, and then we label another section as infrared. And humans being humans, we like to subcategorize. So visible light can be categorized down into the colors. UV or ultraviolet can be categorized down into UVA, UVB, UVC. UVA can be categorized down into UVA1, UVA2. There's all these different subcategories. You can on its smallest level, you get what are called nanometers, which is where you literally number each part of the spectrum. But in its simplest form, sunlight, what we're calling full spectrum, is split up into three major categories, and that's UV, visible light, and infrared. And when we're trying to replicate in captivity, we try and replicate those three main parts. And of course, the irony is that we're pretty good at making lamps that do good little bits, but not a lamp that does the whole thing. Because such a lamp doesn't exist, because you need so much energy that you need a fusion reactor. That's what the sun is. The sun produces all of it. Is that good? is that pretty much explained it?
Yeah, I think, but you can really simplify it and say that, like, basically all of the wavelengths given off from the sun are represented in different chunks that we label, and it's like UV, visible light, and then infrared, and then subcategories to that. But our like T5s, our UVB, are covering one little bit of the UVB spectrum, and then you've got UVA, which we can't really do right well. We'll get into that. And then you've got your infrared, which your halogen is doing, and then we've got this big chunk missing in the middle, and that's where everyone needs to move towards to get from this baseline of just like this weird non-natural light in this, all about things that keeps them alive, but isn't actually about what's really good for the health of your animal.
Yeah, I mean the best way of I've always shown it is by saying it's 1,000 watts per meter squared of energy, and that's actual energy. We measure it in watts, so it's per meter squared. So what's that? About that much. There's 1,000 watts of energy there, right? That's free energy that the sun is beating down on the earth when the sun is out, and that's free energy. And if we're saying that less than 0.5% of that is UV, another 30%, 40% is infrared. There's a whole 50% of it ish that is visible light, that is free energy that wildlife, be it plant, be it flora or fauna, plants or animals, have evolved to utilize in one way or another. And visible light is a large chunk of that. And just because an enclosure looks light to our eyes doesn't necessarily mean it is. You need the physical numbers, because our eyes can dilate, our pupils can dilate and let in more light.
The best example that I've seen is that there was this image going around of someone basically went to the manual settings of their camera, took a picture of like outside, then came in, didn't change the settings, and took a picture of their bearded dragon's enclosure.
Yeah,
and it was just halogen and UV. Yeah, it was Quinn. Yeah, and it looked really, really dark, and that's truly like how dark it actually is. It's just that our eyes adjust and we think it's bright, but actually that's a really, really dark enclosure. So, what type of equipment would you recommend to someone to just add in the visible light that they're currently missing from their enclosure if they've just got halogen and UV?
Go on, Jonathan. What do you recommend in clinic?
Well, I would recommend energy-wise and accessible, and LED. LED. They're bright, energy efficient. That's what I would suggest. There are, from what I understand, downfalls of an LED in that it's somewhat not as natural. The spectrum is missing there, and if I read correctly, it's actually it's kind of adjusted for human eyes, not reptilian eyes.
Mhm.
So it might look quite a bit different. So, but having said that, it's better than like nil visible light, pretty much, of what we provide them at the moment. So
Yeah, it's probably best to like at least hit 3 of their cones out of 4 rather than none of them, isn't it?
none of them, yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's the LEDs are so efficient, so high output for low wattage is what the main draw of them is, and the technology is there because of the efficiency, and the technology has made it useful for human lighting. So they're quite cheap, at least at manufacturing stage. And I'm not saying, some of the products you can buy are very, very expensive, but in terms of manufacturing them, it's dirt cheap. They're of course there are downsides, but LEDs are an ideal lamp. If you can hear random noises, that's the little emerald tree skink just going mental, climbing all over his roof. That's what he's doing. I don't know if you can hear that, but that's what he's doing.
What's the ideal basking spot that you would recommend to a client that would come to you in terms of what equipment you can convince them to buy, Jonathan, when you see them in practice? What way do you describe it that most often is successful for you to get them to get a level that you're acceptable with?
Okay, so first of all, in terms of UVB, using for a bearded dragon, for example, a 2-foot T5. So I do go, so no one's paid me on this. It's either an Arcadia or the Reptisun from Zoomed. They're reliable, and they've been tested. Hundreds of people have tested them around the world on the lighting forum. So I know they're a product that I can say, yep, that's it. Then your incandescent basking globe. So, in Australia, we had the Philips incandescent basking globes, which have recently just been taken off the market due to energy efficient. So they were like, you could buy like 3 of them for the equivalent of like less than £4 or something like that. It was like insane. But that's for heating, the infrared, and then an LED spot. So I'll give you an example. I keep Jackson's Chameleon now, and I have the T5, a 50-watt halogen on there, and then a Sansi 36-watt LED spot.
Is that the funny looking one? It's like
with those little round things, like
weird, isn't
they
it?
pump out heaps of light.
It's so good, right? They're really good.
Really, they're
very strange looking.
When they say LEDs don't produce any heat, no, these things
it gets warm, right?
Yeah,
that's is that the myelin one?
This is Dasku. This one,
Dasku.
I can't show it because my LEDs are lighting it too much. It's got it's the diodes in there, the LED spot diodes.
Yeah,
I just said LED diode. Ugh.
Yeah, see, this is the talk about.
Light emitting diodes, Thomas.
There's a whole range. I mean, there's Reptile branded ones, of course. There's Arcadia do them, Reptile Systems do them, Zoomed do them. Trixie do them, for God's sake. They're all over the place.
And why is it important that we give like an LED spotlight then?
Well, I think we've generalized that it adds that extra bit of the spectrum that is missing from other from not using it. I think in terms of its biological benefits, there's so many, and there's even probably untold benefits of this. We know that we're playing roles in melanopsin, for example, in the eye. So in the back of the eye, there's an opsin called melanopsin, and that responds to blue light about 480 nanometers it peaks at in sensitivity, which is green-blue light. And that is needed to activate circadian rhythms. It's also needed to promote the production of the stopping of melatonin, so the production of the stuff that stops melatonin in the body, the stuff that wakes the body up. There's untold benefits from adding bright light to an enclosure.
If we step back from even just all that, hormonal speak and everything like that.
Press.
We look at the
My
light
electronics are
spectrum.
sparking. Sorry.
Oh, they know. They're getting excited, mate. We're talking about lighting. We're talking about
Yeah, the lights are like, ooh.
Oh yeah.
So
There you go.
we look at the visible light spectrum. It's 43% of what hits the Earth.
Yeah.
So before I added this LED to my Jackson's Chameleon, I had a Jungle Dawn in there. In the first part of the day, it would actually sit under the Jungle Dawn through glass to warm up. This is the light energy. We underestimate how much energy they can absorb from visible light. And you can see this Jackson Chameleon, when he used to go underneath this Jungle Dawn, he would go black to absorb the heat, the light energy from it. And we're missing out on that. This is part of the heating. You look at some of the papers, and they did it like a paper on visible light going through all these lizards. And some of these lizards, it passes all the way through. It even goes straight through their brain, which regulates hormones. This is passing further than some of the infrared that can go in. And if you look at, it's going to sound pretty weird, but I kind of like, every time I see a roadkill lizard or something like that, you open them up, they actually have melanin lining their coelomic cavity.
Yeah.
Black tissue lining their organ, like the organ sac, coelomic cavity. And, some say, it protects them against UV. Or you could also look at it as, if visible light passes through them and it hits that, it's going to warm their core body.
Oh wow! I didn't think like that.
Yeah, well, crack open a bearded dragon. It is black, isn't it? It is black inside there.
Except the trans.
Yeah. Okay. Well, yeah. Well,
that's.
Hilarious.
But this visible light, 43% of the spectrum.
43% of that energy. So that 1,000 watts per meter squared. It's
430 watts.
That is unbelievable. Like that's a lot of energy that you're getting there per meter, right? Per meter squared. So think about it in a field. Like there's so much energy. We've made solar panels. We've tried our best to make solar panels. I have them on the roof, and they're only like 20 to 30% efficient at the best. Right? These animals have evolved over millions of years to absolutely pinpoint the wavelengths that get through the skin and absorb them as best as possible in every way, because it is energy. It's watts. You measure it in watts. So it's, it is. There's like you say, yeah. There is stuff there that even if we don't even consider any of that, the general consensus, in my opinion, should be, if we don't know, then we should refer back to nature. And if we don't 100% know what it does or doesn't do, then we should just try our best to do what it is in nature, because clearly it's there for it. If it's there, someone's going to use it. So even if we weren't 100% sure on the fact that visible light does all this stuff, it's 43% of the stuff out there. So it's it would be mad for us to make a cake and not put in 43% of the ingredients. That would be insane.
That's very true. Yeah, I like that analogy. That's cool.
Yeah, do you like that? I made that up just now.
So Jonathan, have you had any clients come back to you after you recommended that they include visible light in some sort of LED form with a bearded dragon per se, and they've come back and described how it's affected the animal's behavior at all?
Yeah, so I was getting a lot of clients at one stage coming in with using ceramic heat lamps, and then a UV, and then swapping them over to an incandescent plus an LED and visible light. The animals, weren't coming with problems anymore, just because suddenly their lighting, their heating was a lot more efficient. And so therefore the immune system's working better and everything like that. Most of our problems come in with people just inadequate lighting, heating, and When you move it towards what's more natural, they identify the site. You don't have to have this cracking heat of like, you know, a ceramic heat lamp trying to get 38 degrees, 40 degrees. You know, once you've got that light, the incandescent infrared, then the animal can heat all the way through, and suddenly, oh, no more problems. We're not having problems. Parasite loads, not getting sick anymore. They're eating better, stuff like that. So that's the biggest benefit we see, like, you know, them going, that's where the basking spot is, and then they're taking on that energy a lot more effectively than
It's just more natural for them, isn't it? The
a
placement
small,
as well.
yeah, that's it. That's more natural, and rather than some small little section of the sun's wavelength, which they're relying on to have everything that drives them as an ectothermic animal. You know, it's just, you know, it's just not the right way to go about it.
Yeah, it drives them to the next level. I think it's a really good way of putting it. I get a lot of clients from. I work with a vet in Glasgow called Arc Vet. You guys know Chrissy, right? Dr. Chrissy Green.
Yep.
She refers a lot of that veterinary clinic refers a lot of problem animals to me, where it's not necessarily a medical issue. It's a husbandry issue, which of course is a lot of it. You know, a lot of animals that have come in with metabolic bone disease, but it's not necessarily anything wrong. There's nothing the vet can do at this point. It's more just about fixing the husbandry. And they'll send a lot of clients to me, and I mean, I could show you the amount of emails I've had saying, "Oh my God, thank you very much. My animal has decided to be alive again after changing his life."
Makes a difference, doesn't it? This comment from Melissa is basically where I was going to ask next, because we're talking about providing the LEDs, but we haven't talked about how to provide them and where to put them. So this question talks about, like, her bearded dragon is basking under the Sansi more than her UV, because obviously the Sansi is the brightest spot in the Viv. What's the ideal placement for an LED spotlight?
Go for it, Jonathan.
So,
take it.
So we're talking about an animal that basks in the sun with UV, infrared, and visible light. So and we know that bearded dragons have the 4 cones. They can see UVA, visible light. So they're going to go where that visible light is. That's what they want to see. So, you know, that's the cue for them to bask. And then the UVB that comes with it is adding the extra thing for vitamin D synthesis. So ideally, you want, because we're trying to replicate the sun, and we don't have a mini sun that does everything, so we need to overlap everything to hit the spot like a patch of sunlight would out in the wild. So your T5 is going downwards, have your incandescent coming down here, and your LED coming here, so it all overlaps on that one spot. That's the best way to have it, most natural way to have it, and not to confuse them, because there is a lot of, I don't know, some of these enclosures that some of these companies sell, they got the basking lamp fitting on this side, and then the UV lamp fitting on this side, and then the animal goes,
well, which do I go to?
I want heat, but I'm also seeing light from here. Like, which way do I go? And it just confuses the hell out of them. And they're not getting the benefits of.
Yeah.
Well, I had this debate with a manufacturer who manufactures those enclosures, and they said their argument, which at first thought you can imagine from a beginner it makes perfect sense, is that what if they want to get away from the heat but still get UVB, and that sort of makes sense to someone who's not thinking about it.
Visible disgust in Jonathan's face.
That doesn't happen. They can enter shade, but then the whole spectrum drops down. It's not like just the UV is there and the sunlight isn't anymore. The whole sunlight is still there, just at a lower level. That's what shade is. Which is actually what we're providing in captivity, is that sort of shaded level of sunlight.
Yeah. There is a study on chameleons. I think that Gary Ferguson did. How some of them will prefer to choose the UV. But what we need to do, it all comes together, and it peaks and goes down. So we need to have it together. If you want light and heat, it comes with the UV.
Yeah.
That's what's important.
I'm pretty sure in that study the chameleons had metabolic bone disease, so they were choosing UV because for whatever reason it was making them feel healthier. So I'm pretty sure. Don't quote me, but I'm pretty sure that was the conclusion was that they're probably going there because they're actually deficient and the body is just driving them there. Like
after going in that direction, they're getting all the stuff released, that vitamin D.
Yeah.
That's it. So
the irony. I'm pretty sure that was the case.
Yeah, I think that you can use the E27 fittings from Reptile Systems where they're actually rotational. And that's really good for angling the LED spotlight under. That's really good, I think.
Yeah, Arcadia have one, but they don't advertise it as a movable E27 or E26 if you're in the States. They don't advertise it as that, but it is.
Is it?
It's got an L shape. Not the normal one isn't, but it's got an L-shaped metal, and the idea is you can just bend it into place and leave it. Obviously, the idea, you don't. If you keep bending it forever, it'll snap.
You don't even have to go with the brand name ones. You can get them off. You can get them off Amazon.
Yeah, I can't find any adjustable ones though on Amazon.
Oh, really?
I can never find adjustable ones on Amazon. No,
I bought all my ones from there, and they're
really.
Yeah.
Reptile Systems one is really good though. You can sort of screw it into place and it adjusts at an angle, and then you screw it in. Yeah. That one is really good. But yeah, Arcadia's, to my knowledge, they don't advertise it as adjustable, which is strange because it is really feature for it to be adjustable. Yeah.
And there is a lot of worry. People go, but then if you have it at an angle, it's not as natural and stuff like that. But let's be honest, bearded dragons aren't basking in the peak sun. It's when the sun's coming up and it's coming at an angle. So whether it's UV coming in at an angle or visible light or your infrared,
as long as it's not here.
Yeah. As long as it's or coming. Yeah, I've seen people try to mount a UV one from the side, and it's just
pictures.
So there's a difference from this to this.
Yeah, exactly.
That's a big difference.
At an angle, it's not. I think the other issue is some people say that incandescent lamps at an angle can break the filament, but they say anything more than 13 degrees, but really it doesn't really make sense, because if you get an R7 lamp, which are the ones that are
what about all those security lights that are all
exactly. It's that's at an angle constantly, so it's the halide lamps you do need to worry about a little bit, but once it's burned in, I've never had an issue with it. I've never had one misfire. It's the same thing because they come in R7 fixtures as well, so I don't really know. And your halogens burn out in 2 or 3 months anyway, so I've certainly not had any longevity issues from having mine at an angle. Certainly not.
Yeah, I mean, even if you're worried about that, you could focus on angling your LED anyway. So here's a question for you both. If someone was like, do I get a LED bar or an LED spot? And it's either LED spot or bar, what do you say? I mean, ideally you say both, but...
No, I would say get the spot to put it over the basking area. Yeah. And then, just naturally, it's going to filter out to a shade level as you go out. So that would be the best way.
Yeah,
I would say.
I agree. I think obviously it depends on the bar. If the bar is the same size as the T5, then you could probably put it alongside the T5 quite well. Some of the, for example, the Arcadia Pro T5 versus the Trumbull Dawn, you can get the same size unit, so it can go alongside, and then it fits a similar sort of thing. Some of the LED spots are very spot, and that's the issue that I have, is that I've not necessarily got a problem with them being spotlights, but the beam they produce, at usable distances like this, and you're putting that on the back of an animal, it's just not. I'd rather flood the animal with light that's not quite as bright as a spot, because a spot is, it's almost useless if an animal doesn't, the entire animal isn't being covered. There's no point. Which is why the Sansi ones are really good, because it's a spot, but it produces a flood of light at the same time. Mm-hmm. I would always, in my consultations, I always ask for photographs of the setup and specifics, because in some situations a bar would be better over the basking area than a spot. Sometimes if it's a room thing, if you've got quite a shallow enclosure, then having a spotlight inside the enclosure, you're taking away 6 inches of enclosure. So a bar would be better. As a general rule of thumb, a spot is probably better, but that is such a broad statement that it would need a specific to each person's enclosure. What's best is whatever's best for the person and the animal.
Yeah, so say like I've got a 15-inch high, and it's like this as like a height of a viv. Well, if I go like that, it's like, well,
you're taking
on the floor already. So yeah, you'd have to go for a bar because of the shorter form factor. But yeah, I think the LED is really, really paramount, I think. So obviously we've covered now that we want people to have a halogen for the infrared, a UV bar for our UVB, and a LED spot or bar, preferably both for the visible light spectrum.
Oh, yeah.
We've got something else that's left, and I've seen a comment that I will bring up, and we're talking about the UVA now.
Yes.
Yes.
So I'll start on this one if you want. The halides are wonderful. Generally, again, this is a general rule. There are some out there that produce UVB. They're like reptile specific. There's some out there that don't, that are human lights. They pretty much all have a very good UVA spectrum. They've got lots of UVA, which no other light produces at this level. The issues with metal halides are that they require a ballast to run, which means you need to wire in an extra piece of kit. You have to be quite careful with placement in terms of if it's near if you're going to have it on some sort of thermostat, which you shouldn't really. In theory, you could have it on off if you wanted. There's certain caveats with using a metal halide in which I don't personally recommend them for someone who has no idea what they're doing. But if someone has the money and wants to give it a go, they're not. It's not rocket science. They're pretty good. They use them a lot in Europe as a standalone lamp. People use them as just that with no T5, no halogen, like that, because they're very, very good and they're very, very bright. One of the best ways of boosting that lux level is with a halide. The Philips Master Color is the best halide ever made, in my opinion, for visible light and for UVA, because it produces everything in proportion beautifully. It doesn't produce any UVB, but that's what your T5 is for. In terms of UVA and visible light, it is amazing, and it's like a 30-degree angle. So it's not, it's not a spot. It's not necessarily a flood, but far enough away, it is a beautiful lamp. Yeah. To answer the question for asking whether we're best using LED spots or metal halides, without any of the caveats and nuance, if I had to choose between LED and a metal halide, I would say metal halide. But the caveats are that it's, they're not as efficient.
It's a bit more like inaccessible, and how you use it is a bit more in depth than just like screwing on a LED. Do you think they will become more accessible and easier for the consumer to get access to and use safely?
What's that, halides?
Halides.
Do I think they are? No, they're not at all.
Do you think they will be in the future as a prediction?
They've got mercury in them, so they'll be, if anything, they'll get banned.
Right. So we're going to look for some alternative to get UVA in our enclosure, because people think like, because some of the boxes say UVA on like a halogen, or they think it comes as part of like a UV bar, they think they're already providing UVA, but actually we're providing basically nothing in terms of UVA. So I'll give it a go at trying to just briefly explain the cones. So basically, like, us humans have like 3 cones, and when each cone is excited at the same level from lights, things appear like white to us, to white light. Well, reptiles have a 4th cone in the UVA spectrum, and unless we've got UVA in our enclosures to excite that cone as well, the light in our enclosures are going to look like slightly like a weird color. So we're not providing it yet because no one is. Some people think they are, like your survey was telling us, Tom, but actually none of us are providing Tom is, but none of us are providing UVA really.
Not in proportional levels, no. The only way this is where the categorizing of UVA is really important, because it's what we call the UVA 1, which for all intents and purposes can just be called reptile color, reptile UVA. The other part of UVA is UVA 2, which is associated with vitamin D. When that's the UVA that's in your UVB lamp. So UVB lamp produces UVB and that bit of UVA. Doesn't really produce much in terms of the color version of UVA. And even the heat lamps don't. And from what I was chatting to some people about the UVA being on the box of heat lamps, we seem to think it's a regulatory thing.
Right.
It's one of the ways they get away with saying that it's a specialist lamp, is if they say it's for animals and say it has UVA. So they put UVA in the box in order to pass the regulation, because halogens at the moment are, banned in terms of general lighting. So they can say this one isn't for general lighting; it has UVA, and technically it does. Yeah, I suppose.
So if you've got the ability and money, you basically want a halogen, you want a LED spot or a bar, preferably both, and then your UVB bar, and then if you can, a halide right now for UVA. Now we've talked about it being
visible light on that. It does do a lot of visible light as well.
Yeah, that's
if
true.
you had a halide, you wouldn't need that LED. The halide would produce visible light.
That's very true.
A lot of it
in abundance.
Yeah, that's, as we were saying, it's like super popular in Europe, and you can get ballast for them. Like people are selling them for $15 each for these 70-watt.
We're in the wrong country.
Yeah. And you can get them every pet shop here has metal halide lamps. And here they because for the viewers at home, I've moved from Australia to Austria, so I'm speaking from experience. When I say here, it's because I'm in Austria now. Here you go down, get them, and on the packet. So we'll talk about it later, but most of us are using UV index for UV. In Europe, they're still using the UVB watts per centimeter squared. Yeah,
oh, really?
Microwatts. Yeah, and that's what they go off without realizing. You could have heaps of UVA and no UVB and not produce any vitamin D because halides pump out so much UVA that they can write that. So hopefully it's about to change. I'm talking at a big conference, a veterinary conference in May, on UV indexes in beardies and blood vitamin D levels. So so that's a big meeting in Belgium. So all the vets from throughout Europe will be there, and it'll be a good talk.
That'll be really cool.
Yeah, interesting talk. Yeah.
So basically, angling things is a really good way to blend the wavelengths when it's inside a solid topped enclosure. Now, how are we going to blend the wavelengths for our bearded dragons and such when it's a screen top enclosure?
It's so much harder.
What a Thermal Zoo Pro?
You could use a Thermal Zoo Pro. The issue is that your size of enclosure might not fit a Thermal Zoo Pro over 1/3 of it or 1/2 of it, if you like. To be fair, that would work. Yeah, that would work. The issue, of course, from the screen top comes from the fact that the screen blocks out some of the UV, or blocks out all the light, basically. Some of the light. The Thermal Zoo Pro would work, yes. I use a heavily modified Thermal Zoo Pro on my Herman's tortoise, where I've replaced 2 middle fixtures with halides, because it comes with a deep heat projector, which isn't ideal.
That's crap. Yeah, I've got a review coming of the Thermal Zoo Pro coming out soon. Actually, I've actually taken out the deep heat projector and swapped in that exact LED spotlight. So then I've got a Jungle Dawn, a T5 LED spot, and then a halogen. I would actually probably take out the jungle dawn and have 2 T5s, because what I found is very lopsided with the UVI, and I want it to be equal and blend in the middle nicely and stack.
Yeah,
So
it is lopsided. Yeah,
that's also the cheaper one to buy as well. It's the 25 than it is to buy jungle dawn.
is it really?
Yeah, by a good like 30 quid.
Wow.
So that also pays for your LED spot off Amazon.
LED,
Yeah. It's a nice configuration. So that video is coming out soon. But to me, I think that's the only way that we can really blend it over screen top, unless you build some sort of like metal
I built on my chameleon enclosure. I built a rig that goes over it out of just that aluminium extrusion, square extrusion, and just drilled through and attached the fittings on top of that and spaces, so everything's the same level. And
I've got my Emerald Tree Skink set up next to me, and it's the issue with the screen top like that, and the T5 lamps. If you look at them lengthways, it produces a nice wide beam, but if you look at them end on, it's actually quite a narrow beam it produces. It's somewhat okay, but it's narrow. It's pretty narrow, and it's about twice the width of the unit down. So unless the animal is directly under that T5, it ain't getting the UV. So I actually have two. I have one UV at the front, one UV at the back, so that they blend in the middle and the heat lamp in the middle like that. And I have a lot of LEDs. I mean, I have 12 lights on that enclosure. That's the way I've sorted it out. And that's a mesh top. The difficulty with a mesh top is that you can't necessarily angle things.
Do they see the mesh? Like, you know, the light through the mesh, does they get like a grid come down, or does it just blend?
Yeah, you can not always, because the mesh is so fine that it blends together. This is one of the issues with LEDs actually, is each diode is its own spotlight. So what you end up with is this sort of crossed shade effect. I don't know if you ever watch like football or soccer, and you watch and you can see the players and they've got like 5 shadows, and that's because they've got a load of
floodlights in
the stadium. You get the same thing, and we call that the homogeneous nature of the light. So a halogen light will have a homogeneous nature, which means that it's a nice smooth light, whereas LEDs are lots of little spotlights. And if you put your hand out, you can usually see lots of different shadows. The mesh will have that effect, and equally reflectors have that effect as well. Especially if it's an angled reflector rather than a curved reflector. I did the testing of the Reptile Systems Gold lamp, the infrared lamp, and it's really good. But if you put it over like a grid and look at it, you can see 3 distinct bars of light. And the same on the irradiance chart, you can see distinct shape, and that's the reflector beam, because it's a straight reflector rather than a curved reflector, which kind of blends the light a bit more. There's always going to be compromises with lighting animals in captivity, right? The main thing is that we try and do our best. And of course, what we're actually trying to do here is light for daytime, shade average. So we're not actually providing a sunrise and a sunset, which of course we could talk about later. We're not necessarily talking about doing that at this stage. What we're talking about is a day and a night. If we were to provide a shift from dawn to dusk, then you would consider different. If you were actually to do that properly and really replicate sunlight, then you'd have to change everything about how you light the animal, because you'd have to shift the spectrum, because that's what happens, is the spectrum shifts in dawn and dusk. Because you can see it. You go out in the dark, you can see the light going red. And having a cough.
So can I get some confirmation in the chat from everyone? Are you following? I just want to make sure that we're not racing ahead and everyone's lagging behind. If not, that's okay, because this will become an actual video after, so you'll be able to go through and you'll be able to actually like go back and revise things. But I just want to double check that everyone's like, no, I get it so far, or whether we're like,
oh yeah, that's a pretty valid question, isn't it? Actually?
Yeah. Just want to make sure I want to lay foundations, but I want to make sure that everyone actually understands the foundations before we jump and talk about the next thing.
Yeah,
right, we've got some yes from Corey, yep from Triss.
Oh, lovely.
Wow. Okay. I think we've done an all right job there.
I did get sent some questions. Let me just double check, because if any of those questions I get sent touch on this,
The next thing that I wanted to touch upon was power density versus surface temperature, especially for bearded dragons, because it's very pertinent to them as well.
Yes.
Makes complete sense. That's good.
Good.
That's good. This is going well. I like
Would it
it.
be appropriate for us to mention power density without, of course, mentioning Roman Mullering? So I think that needs to be mentioned. Is that?
Yep, of course. Yep.
Ron has kind of pioneered this kind of approach, so it's appropriate that he gets recognition for that, I think.
No problem. Yep. So with power density, I find I've made a factory conveyor belt of bearded dragon videos, and I'm trying to tweak how I describe power density each time so that I can kind of monitor people's reception to it. So why don't you give us the download on power density, Tom, and then I try and give my for dummies version, and we'll see how well it translates.
Okay, so in terms of what we mean when we're talking about power density is as a term, power density literally just means the amount of watts per meter squared, or the amount of watts in a space, the amount of energy in a space. So the density of the power density. And when we're talking about solar power density, this is what I was talking about when I was saying the 1,000 watts per meter squared. That's power density of sunlight on average. What Roman has kind of pushed is this concept that we're measuring UVI or measuring UV. We tend to measure UVI. What Jonathan is talking about is when he's talking about in Europe, they measure the microwatts. That they're measuring the power density of the UVB. That's what they're measuring. Roman has kind of pushed this idea of measuring the power density of in captivity of an incandescent lamp as essentially a proxy for the amount of infrared that we're providing to the animals. Infrared A, which is the basking heat, if you like, as a general rule. So although the meter he has proposed, when used in sunlight, measures a lot of visible light and a lot of infrared, or a fair amount of infrared. But due to some hocus pocus magic science that people don't need to know about, but due to some very lucky maths, essentially, the calculations you can use also work on an incandescent lamp. We just need to drop our values, if that makes sense. So where we're measuring, for all intents and purposes, when we're measuring an infrared lamp or an incandescent lamp, we're measuring the infrared coming from it. The numbers match up that we're pretty much measuring the infrared coming from that lamp if we're measuring the power density. So that's what we're referring to when we're saying measure the power density. We're referring what we're actually meaning is we're measuring the whole lamp, but we're inferring from that the amount of infrared in that lamp or output from that lamp at that point. That makes sense.
Okay, so my dummies version, I might be simplifying it to the point of being wrong, so correct me if I go wrong, but what I kind of try and say is that basically you're using a power meter to measure power density, which is watts per meter squared, right? And this majority is obviously infrared, so you're measuring the intensity of infrared from a bulb and a little bit of visible light as well, right? So just like the ultraviolet indices, we're now trying to figure out how we use power density for our infrared and what different species would go for. But because we don't know, I essentially say that it's a good way to see what's coming off, but you can also do it by behavior alongside it. So you can see if your bearded dragon is basking all day long, it means it's probably struggling to warm up. So you want to up the wattage of that lamp. And then you can track that with the power density to see how much the intensity of infrared's coming. And then if it's completely avoiding it and it's just not basking for any decent amount of time, you probably want to just bring down the wattage, because you're actually, what I'm telling you to do is just lower the power density, so it's something a little bit less intense. And the sweet spot, the Goldilocks zone that you should find of the intensity of infrared, the power density of this lamp, is essentially basking for like a good like 20 minutes, half an hour in the morning, and then again in the evening, and it should go away midday and go do bearded dragon things and the rest of the enclosure. But without telling you like numbers of power or watts per meter squared, following the animal's behavior by doing that, what I'm actually trying to say is up the power density and decrease the power density until you find where the bearded dragon's going to sit. Because I don't know if you did, Jonathan, but I know you went out and you found like the average UVI that you found dragons like basking at. Did you find that with power density, or did this all come out after you?
All this power density stuff came out after my project.
But that's bittersweet.
What I did do. So this is when I talked to Rom about it. Like the first time he talked about it, I was like, this is what I've been thinking all along, because in the enclosure, we say, okay, you want that, so the basking spot is 42 degrees. And it's like, but what happens if someone's using a piece of wood? What happens if someone's using a rock? All these things absorb the heat and then dissipate it through it at different levels. So there was no real way to go, you know what, this is nothing reliable, at least, to say, this is the temperature you need. So like I was when I measured the temperature of the animal's back. I measured the air temperature, and I measured just next to the animal, whatever it was basking on, I measured the temperature of that. And you could see that, like, especially in the morning, like the rock's like 23 degrees and here's a bearded dragon of 42 degrees. Its skin was at 42 degrees. And you're like, well, what happens if, you can't tell them to say, oh, put the basking spot at 23 degrees, because it's just,
you get shot. Yeah.
Like it's how these and bearded dragons, like most reptiles, can change the color of their skin and absorb that sunlight, the visible, the infrared, so much more efficiently than, a rock or a branch. So, there was a way I was trying to work out, I guess the best way I got it was like measure the temperature on the back of your beardie underneath there. But how do you convert that if they just say, oh, we're going to put the basking spot? And when Rom started talking to me about this idea of power density, it's like, yeah, that's what we want. The amount of energy provided to that animal so it can get to its preferred optimal body temperature. And that's all you need to know. Like, that's the ideal way, because you can go, okay, let's provide it with this much energy so it can get there, rather than going, okay, well, I've got to stick, a piece of slate there, and then the slate, for example, is really thin and flat, and it's dissipating heat as fast as it's gaining it.
Yeah.
So my big thing with it is when we're deciding on a UV lamp, we measure the UV from the lamp, right? We stick a meter under the lamp and we go, right, that's the level we want. When we're measuring for lux, we stick a lux meter under the lamp and we're measuring the lamp. We're getting a spectrum from a lamp, we're sticking the spectrometer under the lamp. Why then, when we're trying to decide on a heat lamp, are we pointing our meters at the floor? Like, it just sounds madness, right? Why aren't we pointing it at the lamp like with everything else we do? And so yeah, Rom's process of that made perfect sense for everyone who was kind of in the room. And of course, in the room being a term, not actually, we weren't actually in a room together. Although it was that one night. What was I saying? I was saying something then. I put myself off.
Jim's flying.
I'm flustered.
Still flustered.
Yeah. The idea of measuring the lamp makes much more sense, because we use
makes so much more sense. Yeah.
And if we measure, and we can compare that to sunlight. It's not a direct comparison because of the spectrum differences. But as a general rule, like I was saying, if we say sunlight is 1,000 watts, and we know that infrared A is about 35-40% of that, we can say that 35-40% is around 350-400 watts per meter squared at full sun. And thus, if we want to provide full sun, we can look for 350-400 watts per meter squared of energy of infrared. And luckily, because the math works out, we can actually measure that from an incandescent directly with the meter. And generally, for measuring full sun, people are looking at around 350 to 400. Now, that's a very broad broad way of doing it because, of course, ambient temperatures play a part in basking behaviours, as we know.
Surface temperature does play a part as well, because like you could have like the perfect power density, but if that slate's like 50, the bearded dragon's like, oh, hang on a bit.
Yeah, of
that
course,
might influence how much
do matter.
Yeah, I should caveat my example earlier because like surface temperature might play a role in them avoiding the basking site as well. Actually,
yeah, we certainly
hot,
don't throw away your thermometers. Like that's not the point of this. The point is that it's a. I'm never going to say potentially. It is a better way of determining a heat map. And generally, if you get the power density correct, the temperatures tend to follow anyway. Whenever I measure my temperatures, they're fine. I don't need to dim my lamps ever, and that's because the lamp is appropriate at full power. The lamp is appropriate.
Should we talk about air temperature and ambient and like the difference between that and like on the hot end and the cool end, which I think is more appropriate to say like the light end or the sunny end and then the shaded ends? Do you want to give that a go, Tom?
I can give it a go. Yeah, sure. So yeah, if you truly measure air temperature, the only real way of measuring air temperature is to have a thermometer in the shade, because as soon as it's not in the shade, it's being heated by the radiation from the lamps, be that the light, which we know has a heating effect, or the infrared or whatever. It will heat up the thermometer, the pieces in the thermometer, the components. So you need to avoid that and take a measurement in the shade. Now, this is ambient air temperatures, not surface temperature or anything like that. So we're trying to measure just general temperature in the room. You'll generally find that the ambient temperature is pretty similar across an enclosure. Up and down, you might get a bit of a difference. So if you've got a tall enclosure, you'll get a difference from top to bottom. But generally, providing you've not misted, obviously there's loads of caveats. If you've just misted down the enclosure, it'll all be different. But generally, ambient temperatures are pretty similar throughout an enclosure. The thing that affects it is the light, and that's affecting surface temperatures, which of course affect immediate ambient temperatures around the surface, whatever that may be. But ambient isn't about that. Ambient is about the ambient temperature, and that's generally about the same, no matter what you do. If you have a wide viv, if you open the viv at one end, go to the other end and open the viv, the heat that hits you, or the cool from it hits you if it's cold, will be about the same, right? The temperature that hits you is about the same. Especially true if you have fans, which I think people should do as well, as to get ventilation through the enclosure. If you're pushing air through the enclosure, or if there's any sort of movement of air in the enclosure, then it's almost certainly ambient temperatures are pretty similar throughout, or almost identical throughout. I've kind of forgot what your question was. Was that pretty much it? If you want to measure an ambient temperature, you can do it.
Yeah. The way I try to describe it is like, imagine you're in like a sunny field, right? And there's nothing in that field apart from you and a tree. And you think, oh, it's getting a bit hot here. And to cool down, you instinctually go and just stand in the shade of that tree, right? Well, the air temperature in that field hasn't changed from there to. It's not suddenly like a cooler air temperature under that tree. The difference has been under radiation, out of radiation. So when you're placing your thermometers in your enclosure and you're like, oh, it's the air temperature is like hot over here and it's cool over here, you're not measuring the difference between air temperature there and there. You're effectively measuring how warm your thermometer's getting under radiation and out of radiation. When it's out of radiation, you're truly getting a true reflection of the air temperature. So there isn't really a thermal gradient in terms of air in like a 4x2x2 for a bearded dragon, because it doesn't really exist. It's just that people are seeing like their thermometers like getting like higher because it's under radiation. I mean, the last bearded dragon lighting guide I made, I put like a thermometer in a LED light box. That's really, really like piss weak LEDs on the cheap Amazon light box for like taking pictures. But even just those weak LEDs raised my thermometer's reading from ambient, which was 17, up to like 20 something. So just as simple as that, like the really low quality LEDs raised that. Now, when you see that in like when there's UV, there's jungle dawn, there's spotlights, there's like halogens. Suddenly, when people are like in care guides and stuff, and they're like, "Oh, the ambient on this side should be this, and the ambient air temperature on this should be this," all you're showing is that you're warming up your thermometer.
Yeah, I think when we said at the start, what's the biggest thing issue with lighting.
It's that, yeah.
It's that, yeah. The one thing I see on all of the groups is, why can't I get my temps up over 98 in Fahrenheit or 25 in Celsius? Like, why can't I get it over that? And it's like, you might not really need to. Like, if you measure the power density of the lamp, you might be fine. Stick your hand under the lamp if it's warm. The chances are you've probably just got a little bit of a colder room, and the radiation from the lamp is perfectly fine. Is your animal warming up? Then it's probably okay.
It also simplifies things for people, rather than like this. And like when you talk to beginners, and you're like, right, you want your air temperature, and this is how you read it, right? And you want your air temperature anywhere from sort of like 32 degrees down to 24, even low 20s if they got like a nice basket spot. That's your air temperature, and then this is how you set up your lights. It's like a dual thing then, rather than like this higgledy-piggledy, you want like 5 different little sensors. All you're doing is just seeing how you can warm up certain sensors in different positions.
You're just seeing how different sensors react to lights, yeah.
Have you had much of that from clients, Jonathan?
A lot of, it's a big question that I get all the time. What are the ambients? And it's the idea of a thermal gradient in the early days of reptile keeping, that it went from 35 to 25 at the other end. It just it didn't take into account that these animals are getting their energy from a basking spot radiation. You know, out in the wild, you know, a bearded dragon, like for springtime example, the nights are getting to 5-6 degrees Celsius at night, and they'll be in a burrow. So, you know, and they're in springtime, they're generally pretty shallow burrows. It's not a brumation burrow. So, you know, they're getting down to 10 degrees, their body temperatures. And then the daytime's 23, 24 degrees. And they literally shift out into that sun and just absorb as much heat energy as possible, radiation energy, then get active. You know, there's not it needs to be 35 degrees air temperature around them, anything. They're absorbing that radiation, getting up to temperature and going, game on, bang, let's do what we have to. Mm-hmm. Once they get hot enough, if, for example, the air temperature, ambient, starts getting above 38, that means there is no escape for them to get any cooler, so they're going to start hiding. They get under some heat stress once their core body temperature gets over 38 degrees. So, you know, so if someone's trying to get their ambient temperature in the hot end up to 42 degrees, that bearded dragon's not going to bask at all. If the air is, you know, around it, is that hot?
Hot,
yeah. So, you know, it's something that, you know, some of my early books on reptile keeping back from the 90s, good, don't get me wrong, but the thought of a thermal gradient just wasn't there. Like, I look back at it now, I always question it. What's this thermal gradient? It's not how it works, and you need a basking spot. And now we're going, okay, all this stuff's coming in. You know, as long as that radiation spot is getting them enough energy to switch on their immune system, digestive system, body functions, so they can do what they need to do around the rest of the cage and then back. Yeah, provided it's not too stupid. Like, you know, you don't want to keep your tank in, you know, 4 degrees all the time and just have a hot spot. But, like, you know, it's you know, you can be 23 degrees or 27 degrees as long as they can get up to that operating temperature rapidly and be able to retain that heat for what they need to do during the day is what's important.
I think the only time a thermal gradient in that traditional sense is like when people are keeping things in like tubs and racks. There's literally like an actual temperature of the floor across. Whereas arguably you shouldn't be doing that anyway. But
a lot of those tubs, well, even a lot of those tubs, they've got heat cord underneath it. So it's a spot as well. They shift on it and it's 38 degrees on that heat, and then they shift off it and it's 28 degrees, 12 degrees, whatever it is in the rest of the room. And they just shuttle on, shuttle off. So it's not really a thermal gradient. You get it in sea snakes where they go in the different layers of the ocean. But, you know, that's a lot more conducting heat, temperature. But, you know, you don't, that thermal gradient idea is, it's old, and yeah, it doesn't, it helps them explain it back in the day, but we now know more about reptile behavior and the thermal studies and stuff like that.
You do get a thermal gradient in a vertical enclosure. You will get heat at the top where the lights are. But what we find is that animals, that matches the light pretty well. So obviously the lights are at the top, right? So that is what you're getting. You're getting heat and light at the top, and the cooler down at the bottom. And obviously when you mist your enclosure down, the moisture goes down to the bottom. So you get this humid, cooler area down at the bottom. But you can increase ambience doing that if you just get a light that shines. And the Reptile Systems golds are really good for that. I can get fairly constant temperatures throughout a glass enclosure using those things just by heating in a wider area. The problem with your E27 or E26 sort of halogens and incandescents is that it's quite narrow, whereas the gold lamps are quite a broad spread of heat.
This is a really good comment. So basically, power density should go hand in hand with ventilation, otherwise things get dimmed when the ambience rise in the summer.
Yeah, dimming in the summer is a thing you will have to do if you don't have cooling mechanisms for your rooms. I cool my room with air conditioning. It still gets hot, but I cool my reptile room in my house with air conditioning in the summer because it's difficult. But in the UK, we don't really have AC. It's difficult.
Yeah, this is a massive problem in Australia with, you know, in nature, the animal has so many microhabitats available to them to cool down even on the hottest of days. Whereas when we stick them in a box, you know, that's everything that they have. And actually, we used to get in the hottest part, well, not the hottest part, just after the hottest part of summer, is we used to get a lot of bearded dragons and other reptiles coming in because the thermostat or the person switched off the heating because it was getting above the ambience, getting above 30. And so the thermostat was switching off. So the basking light's not going on anymore. But these bearded dragons are never getting their core body temperatures to 36.3 because there's just the thermostat kept dimming it because the ambience were getting so high. So even though it felt like hot to us and the temperature was hot, these dragons were all coming in with problems, infections, stuff like that. Because
having not basked, essentially.
Yeah, because they can't bask and get to their required temperature adequately. So, you know, it's a challenge of reptile keepers, you know, to allow that hot spot when in the summer for the temperature to get up. And largely how I solved it, one, air conditioning, but also having a well-ventilated enclosure so large that even if that lamp is on full bore at 42 degrees, that animal still has an opportunity to get away from it at the other end. And this is why a big push, you know, from what we recommend is having something bigger than a, you know, 3-foot enclosure type thing. You know, if you keep them in a hot box, they cannot escape if thermostat goes wrong. So, you know, a lot of my enclosures when I used to keep them they were all 4-foot, 5-foot enclosures and a low wattage globe. So if it was 100%, unless that room temperature got, you know, to a critical level, it could be on 100% and the animal could still get away from that heat source. So, and that heat source had no influence on the cool end. So
because it's ambient temperature.
Yeah,
which is why the ventilation thing, Christine, is right. It's I have fans on all of my enclosures, and I have them on. I put them on every day. At least they're all on timers, just to get fresh air into the enclosure anyway. Because I think fresh air is good, but I think it's really, really useful for everyone to install a fan on their enclosure, either an in or an out. I usually do both, so the one pushing in, one pulling out. It just gets fresh air in the enclosure, and it pushes cooler air through to make sure that the cool end is within reason. Of course, it can get hot. It gets hot in nature, but it needs it as long as it's not dangerous, right? You don't want it 45 ambient all day; you'd boil. But
no, you kill.
What would you say is the critical high air temperature for a bearded dragon?
So we know that once their core body temperature gets to 38.6 degrees, they're stressed. They will do what they can. They'll flatten themselves out in shade on the sand out in the wild to cool themselves down as much as they can. So, when I was out there doing my study, we went out one summer, and it was during the really hot time, and we didn't find any beardies because it was just too hot. They had all retreated to burrows and pretty much estivated. They're just not coming out. If that animal, so the reason why we say get their skin temperatures up to 42 degrees, this is taking in consideration that overnight their bodies have gone down to 18, 15 degrees, and then they need to get to that warm temperature. But that's how much energy you need on their skin to get their core to 36.3 degrees. So once the air temperature gets to 38.6, they won't burst, they'll hide, they'll go into burrows. And that's the critical air temperature. So
considering that all thermometers are within 10%, you would say 33, 34 maybe is a max ambient air? Just to give us that sort of leeway on the sense that if mine says 33, it could well be 38 because of the 10% difference thing.
Sorry, what 10%? What thermometer?
So we're saying if we say as an average, all man-made items are within 10% of each other, right? So my thermometer is within 10% of your thermometer.
Okay.
Right, so if mine says 30, yours could say 33, and we'll call them about the same.
Okay.
Right.
Yeah.
There's a general, so all pretty much all the solar meters, right? They're all calibrated to within 10% of the standard. So if we're saying, if we're to give a prescribed maximum level,
no, most thermometers are within 1 to 2%. That's something that I had to do to calibrate my thermometers for my field studies. So,
okay. But if we're saying people are buying crap ones on Amazon, if we're going to prescribe it,
they're using analog, the little dial ones.
Well, actually, some of the analog ones are more accurate.
Really?
You don't want to go 38 because somebody's will read 38 and it'll actually be 42.
Yeah. Honestly, if your cool end of your, or the ambience in your room are getting above 30, it doesn't leave you much leeway if something goes wrong. So, we went out one time in summer, and once the night temperatures get above 30, there is no basking during the day. These animals go into estivation. They're stressed because it's heat stress as well as, just as the same as be cold stress. And they'll just bunker down. So, so keeping the ambience under 30 is, or 30 or less is a good way to make sure that, your dragon's going to bask, do everything it can in that small box that you've given it.
There's a concept on this in Komodo dragons in captivity. On Komodo the temperature gets really high, and in the wild these dragons are going into the shade and sort of forcing air through their body by moving back and forth and trying to cool down as much as possible. And we don't get that behavior in captivity at all. And there's this sort of concept that in captivity Komodo dragons don't live as long as in the wild, right? It's one of those animals that we can't get the longevity to. They don't last as long. They're last about 7 years in captivity, 8 years, 10 years, something like that.
So sorry, I thought you.
It's interesting that this body. There's a theory with Komodo dragons that the heat stress is actually quite a good thing because it gets the muscles going and they need it. Almost like we say some animals, they need brumation. It's like the opposite. It's like they don't estimate; they just cook. And there's
So all of you in the chat, make sure you heat your Komodo dragons properly.
You got a Komodo dragon? Cook it. Yeah,
That's it. Get it hot.
So
Get
to
it
bring
really
it back to power density dropping in the summer, I think the best way to probably do it is have your thermostat probe on the shaded end, and then have it set to sort of like 33, 35-ish, so that if your ambient air temperatures do get to like a critical level that we're worried about dimming, then it starts to dim the power density of your lamp, because that's just about safety, not about like that's controlling the power density. You're actually using the wattages to control your power density. Just using the probe on the cool end is like just your safety limit, and then it will just turn it off.
Or in the shade on the warm end, it doesn't, it can be anywhere.
If it's shaded, yeah. As long as it's shaded.
Yeah. Generally, I used to, it's definitely, as we know, there's a science to heating your terrarium, but it's also an art. And, I used to put my thermostats kind of, more towards away from the heat source, and just use a low enough wattage so the basking spot, the animal could get to the right temperature, because I wanted it going enough that, when you start getting to, if you put it at away from the heat source and set it to 27, for example, and that's like, especially in Australia, that's like 3/4 of the year. The temperature's going to get to that. So the animal just wouldn't be able to get to the right basking temperature. So you just it's, as we say, it's an art form, trying to get it right. So,
and that leads me to this comment from Melissa: is like, how do people put this into super beginner layman's terms? When people are struggling to even recognize the need to use UVB. Well, first of all, use reptilesandresearch as a resource.
This is what I've kind of said with the survey, right? Is that we're very privileged in that we can say things like power density and gradients and getting all it, but like to someone who is just buying a bearded dragon for the son for his 9th birthday, there's got to be an easy way. Which is why, for me, I think the manufacturers are the ones that should be in charge of doing that. But I think in terms of explaining it on Facebook groups, I think the easiest way to explain it to someone is to say energy from the lamp, and not even worry too much about using technical language, and just say we want the right amount of energy from the lamp for the animal, because these are ectothermic animals and they take energy from light.
So what do you think about me saying like play Goldilocks with the wattage and do the bask how we want to bask?
We don't need to worry about, you need the right amount of UV energy from the UV lamp. You need the right amount of visible light energy, although some people find that quite a strange thing, the idea of visible light. So, the amount of light energy and the amount of infrared energy from the lamp to be the right level. And luckily, there's lots of information where people who have the time, effort, and understanding can look a bit more into this sort of thing. They can use resources. I mean, I've made the ISO radiance charts for infrared from heat lamps to kind of show how far away you could have a lamp from an animal and still get away with a decent power density from the lamp.
Yeah, and also, Melissa, my last bearded dragon lighting guide, I made like the dummies guide version of this. So have a look at that if you still need to like.
But when we look at it, even we're looking at power densities and stuff like that. If you look across the globe, the power density in any particular area is going to be almost the same. So you get it right for a bearded dragon, you have it right for a monitor, you have it right for a snake, and you have a large enough enclosure, the animal will thermoregulate to that. It's just the ambience in the wild due to ocean currents, air currents, stuff like that, which bring it up, which makes the difference. So this concept of having, that light energy, the infrared energy, and you're getting it to that certain wattage is almost going to be uniform for any species, except for maybe, an adder in the Arctic Circle. Like, it's
you've got like crepuscular animals, in which case but there are other caveats with crepuscular animals, which is that with all animals, like I was saying, we're providing shade levels throughout the day. We're not providing full sun levels. So we're not providing the 450 watts per meter squared generally to an animal, because that's full sun, and very rarely animals bask. Some do, but most of the common cat species, your leopard geckos, your crested geckos, bearded dragons, they don't bask in full sun because it's too hot. And especially with crepuscular animals, where they bask in full sun, but it's cryptic basking, or they will come out in the evenings when that power density in the wild is much lower. So as long as you're getting the power density right for full day levels, then you're okay. And then as soon as we start looking, you can do the same with UV, right? We provide shade levels of UV for, if you give a crested gecko, you're not going to give it UVI 5, even though a leopard gecko in the wild could easily experience UVI 6, 7, 8, 9, because they just go out in the sun, and they would, but they don't because they're hiding. So what we do is we provide the safe levels, the low levels, throughout the day.
So almost the goal is to basically try and replicate sunlight as much as possible, and then whatever like characteristic of behavior the species evolved to like exhibit, they will adapt around that sunshine patch. Almost the way we can't do it, because our bulbs have been like fixed at a certain amount, we always had to like characterize it and like fine tune it to be about like what that species will be able to use. I suppose it's the segue to talking about the new tech now, because this kind of changes everything, doesn't it, really?
Yeah, it leads on from the idea of providing full levels. I do want to say that we don't currently provide full sun levels for our animals. That is not some people say that, and we do not. Currently, when I say currently, I mean as of 2 weeks ago, the latest thing was not to provide full sun levels to your animal. You provide a bearded dragon, we'll use an example. You provide a UVI of around 4. That's not full sun levels. Full sun levels is UVI 12, right, to that animal. So we've never recommended, or I've never recommended, providing full sun levels to a bearded dragon. That is not what we do. What we do is we provide the average level or shade level,
of what they prefer,
heightened shade levels to that animal. So historically, we've turned our lamps on. The product that has recently come out is the Arcadia Luminize line, which is the concept of dawn and dusk for your LED and your UVB lamp. In the marketing, and
there we go.
it's worth me. I'm using it a little bit on some of my enclosures. I think it's really nice. It's a beautiful product. There's nothing broken necessarily with it. However, I personally, and I'm sure these guys can say whether they do or not, but I personally have some reservations about the recommendations that are currently given for the system.
Yeah.
The problem with them is that the current way of doing it is that we're providing a maximum UVI. If we're talking UV, we're providing a maximum UVI of shade levels or of safe levels. In the advertising and marketing for the Arcadia Luminize range, there has been an implication that we've been providing daylight levels all the time. We're not. The implication is that the lights turn on and we're providing midday levels, but we're not doing that. That's not what we're doing. The lights turn on and we're providing morning levels, essentially, is what we're doing. And the recommendations are a little bit fun, especially when it comes to bearded dragons, I think, which is an interesting thing. I know, Jonathan, you basically, I tested the lamps. I tested the 24 watt and the Jungle Dawn 39 watt, I think it is, before they came out, and I waited for them to announce the product, and then within a minute posted the results, because I knew it was on Reptile Lighting. And Jonathan, you commented with pretty much my same concern, if you like, which is the idea that potentially we're not, if we do what they say, we might not provide the UV.
That's so. What a lot of people don't understand with the UV index lighting recommendations, the Ferguson zones, is it's based off what an average animal would want to get. So if we look at my results, Tom, you'll whack it up on the screen later.
Yeah.
But we had animals, basking early or late in the day, and they would have a UV index of, 1 to 2. But then we had animals basking at 11 a.m. or 2 p.m., and they were basking at levels of 7, 8, 9. But when you average it out, where the sun's provided and these animals provided, we had an average of 4, a VI of 4. So we base that off for the Ferguson zone, that while the sun's out, while they're basking, on average it's going to be a UVI of 4, and technically that should provide the amount of UVB for sufficient development of vitamin D.
Mm-hmm.
But that's how we currently keep animals, where it was light goes on, UV index at that basking spot is 4. So, and it's available to the animal at the whole time during that 12 hours the light, or 10 hours the light's on. But that's not how it works in nature. Nature, it starts at 0, the sun comes up at 0, and then towards midday it hits, springtime, it's hitting 10, 11, early spring. Late spring, it's hitting 12. Peak summer, it's hitting 13 and 14. And then it's going back down. And if you were to replicate that in a tank and grade it up and providing the heat, you need to get it to the 10 or 12, which is provided in the wild, if you want to start ramping it up the same curve as what happens in the wild. Mm-hmm. And if we're providing heat without ramping it up, or you misalign it and the animal's basking too early, it's not going to get the average that it needs to provide enough vitamin D. It's a good concept to have this ramping up and down, and it is getting so it's closer to nature, but then you need to match it with the temperature that you're providing, the power density as the day goes through, but also the light levels to stimulate them to bask and everything. Mm-hmm. And we have to then even consider how cold did it get at night, because in the seasons that determines when they come out to bask. Wow. And how long they need to bask. So suddenly you're adding all these, with the Ferguson zones before at 4 and what we did for 12 hours, it was kind of like very simplified, keep it simple, and it works. But now you have to align temperature, lumens of light, UV, and you have to get it right. Plus you need to determine what your nighttime temperature is doing too, to mimic the season, to line it up. And suddenly you've got 4 things to try and align perfectly to get it so they're getting enough UV.
The worry is if it's beginner friendly. It's the same with everything, isn't it? It's the same with mobile phones, right? Or the same with cars. Like, the more tech we've included in these products, the more things go wrong and the more issues there are, and the more it's difficult to find the issue. If your car has a blinking red light, it could be one of 3 million different problems with the car if it's a modern car. If your light didn't turn on your enclosure, previously it's either the fixture or the bulb, but now it's going to be the fixture, the bulb, the Bluetooth device, your phone. It's like more and more tech. There's more and more things go wrong. Not necessarily a bad thing, but it is a thing that's worth looking at. I mean, I've got. If I show you the
I'll give you the floor. There you go.
I know. Oh, it's not very good. Annoyingly, right? No, of course. No,
I'm trying to play it around with the formatting.
You do that. Annoyingly, hello. Annoyingly, as soon as I do this, my entire screen goes off for me. But can you see that?
Nothing's happened for us. No,
nothing's changed at all. Oh, so it hasn't gone like that at all for you.
What have I got at that? No. Well, that's a little bit better, I suppose. Maybe if you just zoom in a little bit. Oh.
Yeah, let me.
Can I?
Oh, that's better.
Yeah, that's better.
There
we go. There we go.
Yeah, for some reason, if I click on like slideshow, it just doesn't pop up on the screen. I don't know. Either way. So this was the other day in Winaring, which is bearded dragon territory. Are we safe to say that?
Yep, that's where that's kind of like the center of where we got most
Yeah.
of our bearded dragons from. So
Cool. So this is the other day, the UV index starting at 6.
So this is late spring.
This is the other day. It was either yesterday or the day before. So yeah.
Yep.
You see the UVI kind of goes up just under 10. We could say 10 for sake of numbers if you wanted, but you can see that there's a pyramid shape, right? It ramps up, gets to about 10, and then ramps back down. And here I have kind of approximated Jonathan's data from his study on them, and this is what you were talking about, right? With I think your thing starts at about 9:30 on your paper.
Yep.
And you can see that some animals bask up here, some animals are basking in the shade. The average was around average. In your paper, it said 4.1, which is why we use that as a standard. I use a little bit higher. I used 4.7, but it's close enough that I'm not overly worried. But you can see the difference in basking from this to what my beardie does, and I know a lot of beardies do, which is this, which is these two purple bars. Essentially, he'll bask in the morning, and this is the UVI is on. That shouldn't say luminize. He'll bask, the UVI is on all day at around 4.7. He'll bask in the morning from about 7:30 to around just past 9 o'clock. And then he'll bask in the evening from just before 5 till just after 6.
That's that biphasic basking. That's what they're like trying to do, isn't it?
Yeah, so he's basking in the morning. During the day, he's still in the enclosure, but he's away from the basking area. So he's not getting the UVI 4.7. He's getting UVI 1 point whatever because he's in the shade. Now, I installed the Luminize, and we look at the Luminize guide, and it says to start at 6 a.m. with 0% power. The idea of the Luminize is that you can set it on the app and ramp up the UV and ramp down the UV at times, whenever you want. It says to start at 6, then at 11 go to 100%, then at 3 p.m. go to 100%, and then at 7 p.m. go to 0%. And if you plot that, it looks like this. So you get with a 0% at 6 a.m. At 11 a.m. we're at 100%, which is 4.7.
Mm-hmm.
Then at 4.7 at the end of the day, it ramps down. Now, if I put the bearded dragon basking now, you can see my beardie will not be exposed. The maximum you'd be exposed to is probably around just under 3, about 2.8.
Because your halogen's the same, isn't it? It's not ramping. It's just on.
I'm not ramping anything else up. Yeah, I mean, the LED is following a similar pattern, but for the sake of UV, if we are, this was his basking pattern on the 30th. So this was yesterday. He started at 7:30 and finished just after 9, and then basking again at about 20 to 5, and then finishing again at about 10 past 8.
Just I'll cut in here. Anyone in the listening, put in the chat what time your beardie baths at.
Yeah,
in captivity.
Yeah,
That would be really cool. Yeah.
Let's see how it would go on this graph, because just from my experience too, is that in captivity, because the temperature is not as cold. So in the wild, bearded dragons, the nighttime temperature, especially in spring, it's quite cold. So they're not coming out till later because the ambient temperature has to get above a certain. So what we found is, and it's matched in Judith Battles' paper, that their body temperature would have to get to 23 degrees to start going to an exposed position for basking. And they didn't actually start actively basking till they got to above 21 degrees. So in captivity, if your room is only getting to 20 degrees, they don't have to wait very long to go, okay, I'm going to start basking. That's why they come out earlier.
This was one of my concerns as well, is that a lot of people have automatic central heating, so it's turned on an hour before we wake up, right? Yeah. So already before your lights have even turned on, you've warmed up your room ready for the day.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's
issue,
not the way it works. It's usually coldest at dawn, and then obviously the sun comes up, starts heating the earth, and then it starts absorbing some heat. Then they become active. So yeah.
So yeah,
following this pattern
in the wild is more like that, right?
Yeah, so 9:30 is what. So and funny enough is we had certain roads we went on, and if it was a north-south facing, they would come out later. Whereas if it was a north-facing road, east-west, they would come out a lot earlier. So even the aspect made
Isn't
a
that
difference.
interesting?
So,
Yeah.
That's interesting.
So following this, like if your bearded dragon was doing this, effectively they're only going to get to like a UVI of like 2, right? Each time they're at
the moment under the luminize, he's getting max UVI 2.8. By the time he's stopped basking, it's now ramping up to the recommended levels of 3 to 5.
But previously, if we had seen that in someone's post, or if you saw a client, Jonathan, I think all 4 of us would be saying like, you need to replace your bulb.
Oh yeah.
If an animal was only being exposed to UVI, between 2 and 3, you'd say you need to provide more UV, is what you'd be saying. And of course, we can compare that to nature, which is there, and you can see that at the start of the day it matches pretty closely. But then, this 8 a.m., which is mid basking time for the bearded dragon, you end up with this ramp up here, and obviously in the wild they'll be basking a little bit later anyway, according to this. But it's this dip off that's the problem, isn't it? This late plateau. My recommendation was to potentially have the plateau happen earlier, so the bearded dragon will be basking like that, so they still get this access to this higher level. Yep, that could be a fix.
Yeah. So really, if we go down the line of we're replicating nature, you would need a very large enclosure, and you would need to be peaking at 10,
which is the next fix. I'd say I've said peak at 7 because that's the Ferguson zone max, or 7.6 or whatever. But for the sake of this, I'd said you could peak higher, and then it would match sunlight really well. Yep. But you need to peak higher. Yeah. In order for that to happen, and you could, in theory, do it.
Yeah, and this would work in, where the night temperatures aren't as cold, and your beardie's not going to be basking in that middle part of the day anyway. So, it could work, but you would have to be a very attentive keeper, to make sure that this works.
And you need to own a solar meter.
I was going to say, I mean, I haven't got it. I haven't looked at the app or anything like that. But how would I know that I was peaking at that number? Because if I didn't own a solar meter, I would look on a box and be like, right, that distance to that, I can keep that bulb for a year or whatever. This, I'm like dialing things without ever knowing if I'm doing it right.
Yeah, you've got to go off the 100% value and then go down in percentages, kind of work it out. Luckily, the percentages are pretty close. So, they're a little bit off, but when it's at 90% power, it's producing about 90% of the UVI, about that. It's not 100% accurate, but...
Is there any spectral differences?
Pardon?
Is there any spectral differences?
No. I'll stop showing that.
It's not a black body, is it?
No, so that was one of the big things as well, yeah. There is no... The spectrum doesn't really shift, no. However, what is another potential worry is... anyway, a bit of a background knowledge first. So the Arcadia, I say bulb, it's a lamp technically. The T5 tube is historically been made by a company called Sylvania in Germany. Now, that Sylvania is the brand name. The company in Germany was historically called Sylvania Lighting International. They've got a new name now.
Begins with an O, doesn't it?
Pardon?
Begins with an O, doesn't it?
No, well, that's the... So, yes. Sylvania as a brand is owned by Osram, which is another manufacturing company. And Osram bought the American manufacturing side and a few other different things. The Sylvania Lighting International is the German side. They both share the Sylvania name. It's a bit like Mitsubishi. They have like air conditioners and cars and all sorts of stuff. They're all the same thing, but they did different companies underneath them. Sylvania, it's the same thing with Sylvania. So Osram, who is another light manufacturer, owns part of the Sylvania brand. So Osram Sylvania is one company. And Osram's guidance, so Sylvania, so for all intents and purposes, Sylvania's guidance on T5 fluorescent lights is if you are going to dim them, this is their official guidance. If you're going to dim them, you need to have them on full power for the first 100 hours, because otherwise the phosphors don't bed properly. And they use an international standard code called IEC 60081. And I don't have that written anywhere. I've memorized that. That's their kind of standard. And that standard applies to general lighting, but the phosphors are the same concept, right? So, and it's because the phosphors need to bed in and fix themselves, if you like. So if you don't have the lamp, according to Osram, if you are dimming a T5, if you're going to dim a T5, you need to have it on 100% for the first 100 hours of use. Otherwise, you ruin the longevity of the lamp.
Wow.
Now, the reason the spectrum doesn't shift is because of those phosphors. So it's not a black body. Black bodies shift spectrum as you dim them. A phosphor won't do that. A phosphor just intensity just changes. But if you don't have it on for the first 100 hours on full power, then you could see problems in shifting spectrum. Now, I've not tested that. Every time I do a test, I test and I burn a lamp in at 100% for the first 100 hours. That's what I do.
That's 4 days, isn't it, straight?
Pardon?
About that 4.1 days straight?
Yeah, what I do is I also turn them off for an hour in the middle of it to kind of give it an on-off cycle. Now, Osram says that doesn't affect anything. In the T5 lighting, they say you can turn it off and on as many times as you want, but you must have it on full power when it's on. It must be on full power for 100 hours before you dim the light. And that's Osram. They're the company that owns Sylvania, which are the ones that make the T5s. Now, Arcadia haven't said anything about this, to my knowledge. Bear in mind, I want to be completely transparent. I didn't figure that out. That was Serena that told me that. And then Serena and the Osram booklet I read she sent me a German version of the Osram helpline. That basically it goes into the details of the dimming. Christine sent me a copy as well. But yes, the spectrum doesn't shift, no, because it's not a black body. However, I haven't tested it without burning in the lamp.
Burning it in, yeah.
So that's my next test, is to not burn it in on 100% and see if there's a difference in spectrum there, because it could well be that some of the phosphors don't fix properly if it's not on 100% for the first 100 hours. It's an interesting worry. I don't know what the problem will be. Arcadia, to my knowledge, haven't tested. Haven't released any test of that anyway. They may well have tested it, but to my knowledge, they haven't addressed that concern. The Osram, the official IEC 60081. 00820.
If it is true, when you buy a new bulb, you're either going to have a completely different T5 just to burn it in, or you're going to stress your animals out because they've gone from expecting like a ramp up to just suddenly turning on for the first 100 hours.
Yeah, the irony of the having to turn it on. Well, you're gonna have to if it is true that you need to burn in the light for 100 hours first, according to Osram. If that is true, then they may just have to burn the lights in at the manufacturing stage for the first 100 hours for all keepers.
Yeah, I mean, we were setting up a paradise today for you, weren't we? And like, obviously, it was a brand new lamp, and I was like, "What's the UVI going to be at? Because it's not been burned in yet." And it was a UVI 12 for this toad, and I was like, "Yeah, you're going to have to burn that."
That was Reptile Systems
Zone 3.
Zone 3, yeah. That was at like 30 centimeters away.
Send me that bulb.
Okay.
It's not. It's 15 inches.
Okay, well, it was like that far away from it.
That's not right. Send me that bulb.
It was like 12.8. Like, it was a lot.
Was that
summertime in your
The issue is, if it's that high, it could be really short wavelength UVB. Send me that bulb.
Okay.
That sounds like a lot. If you were going to say 6, I'd have said, let it burn in for a few hours, isn't it? But 12, right?
Yeah. So when I obviously I've got the Luminous and I've got the Shade Dweller and I've got it on a little like desk tank. on a species I haven't said I own yet. But I also had like a previous shade dweller from like the old shade dweller I had on the king snake, so I've popped that into use. Whilst the other one I've turned on and slid under some vivs so it doesn't like wake me up at night. I'm just burning it in until like Tuesday. So like I'm not gonna pop it in and like basically ruin the brand new bulb.
Yeah, you don't want to ruin, like, make it a 5-month like lamp. Like, you want it to stay. All the guarantees that we have that lasts a year are based on 100 hours of 100% burning. That's what all those numbers are based on. That's historically, whenever Frances did it, she burned in lights for 100 hours first. Because if you don't, you see it fluctuates. I mean, if you look at some of the lamps, the UVI goes right up, then right down, and then levels out. And that's what happens. It's just part of the burning in process. And according to the manufacturer, that's essential because the phosphors don't bed in unless you have that on. I'm yet to do the testing. It is also worth noting that as of August 2023, Sylvania do not manufacture T5 bulbs because the plant has closed. So anyway, yeah. So I to my knowledge, Arcadia and Zume both historically used Sylvania. They're the same. The 5.0 and the 6% and the 10.0 and the top set are the same bulbs, same batch code, same everything. But Sylvania no longer manufacture lamps. Now, where they decide to get them from, I don't know. But so as of right now, they're no longer manufactured in Sylvania because they don't manufacture them anymore. So SLI, Sylvania Lighting International, could get them from, could broker them from other manufacturers. But in theory, they won't be made in Germany anymore. And that's Sylvania has said that is because of the fluorescent ban and all that sort of stuff, which is, I've had a lot of hate because of, I've mentioned a ban on fluorescents. People have sent me some very angry messages.
Really?
I've had some very angry people because I've mentioned the possibility of a ban, and for the record, I'm still adamant that it's happening.
Ooh.
I can read a statement saying they're not stopping production, but they are going over to the factory open till 2025. Did they? I don't. If that happened, send me a screenshot of that statement because I've not seen that.
I think the only thing we can say is that longevity of a product has nothing to do with us. So if it ends up being banned and you bought loads of things from a certain brand, take it up with that brand.
Yeah.
Nothing to do with us.
Legal advice.
Yeah, nothing to do with us.
I didn't know that Arcadia released a statement saying they're not stopping production, though. That's interesting. I mean, Sylvania has stopped production, so whether Arcadia likes it or not, Sylvania, the company that makes the bulbs, has stopped producing them. So Arcadia may still be able to get them through Sylvania, who can get them from other sources, but Sylvania themselves do not manufacture them anymore. That is a fact. So they can say as much as they want. They can say whatever they like, and they can also mention things about the exemption from the fluorescent ban, but I don't.
Well, it's their problem, not ours. So when it comes to like dimming these lamps, right, and the UVI obviously will go up with it, and a nice percentage. Obviously, when we look at a UVI on a normal T5, right, and obviously the UVI is strongest, highest at the center, and lowest at the ends. How does that play a role in like how it dims as well? Because if you're having that to the side of our vivarium, right, and a halogen's there, but it's actually the end that's next to a halogen, the rest goes across. When you dim it, like what's happening here? And should we have it like at an angle if we're going to dim now, or like what's the hypotenuse of the balancing scale?
I would always have your your T5 and your other lights central to the T5. So try not to have, if we're going very basic and saying a heat lamp and a T5, don't have your T5 then your heat lamp at one end. Have your heat lamp in the middle of the T5. So you may need to tilt your T5 around. What we find, or what I found anyway, is that the dimming effect is pretty standard, except for when it gets to about 25%. And then the middle dims more than the rest. So I end up with these two bulges where it dims in the middle more. And that's, I believe, just because of electron flow through the T5. I imagine it's just that. It's just the electrons, whatever. The magic that happens inside a T5 isn't
the genie.
Isn't it magical in the middle? as it is at the ends at that point. On a full power or 25% or over, we see this sort of bigger. Bigger. I don't. If I send you an image, can you put it on the thing? If I show it you.
I think you can click present at the bottom,
just
and I can allow you to present your screen.
Okay, let me. Oh God, hang on.
Have you had a chance to play with the new Luminize, Jonathan?
No, not at all. Not at all.
Not at all.
I'm not important enough to be.
Oh, don't worry.
Yeah, but we all paid our money for it.
Oh, don't worry. Don't you worry. I just got it slightly ahead of time because I'm cheeky.
You cheeky bugger.
But if we talk about this ramping up of UV, but also ramping up of visible light, so how fast, like in nature, the amount of lumens ramping up happens quite rapidly. It's not like there's a difference between
it's not
9:30
like the
and
UVI
11:30.
chart where it's like a pyramid. It's
like
pretty much,
yeah. So what are you gonna like? Is I guess you could tailor it to yourself because I haven't had the product. So if you get those jungle dawns or whatever is installed, you need to ramp up that visible light a lot quicker if you want to replicate.
If you were to replicate sunlight, yeah, you would ramp up that over 20 minutes, 30 minutes, and then the T5 a lot longer. Yeah, in theory that would work. Yeah.
Yeah, and then what about ramping up of your incandescent lamp for infrared 8? Their
recommendation is to just have them turn on. The issue, so your infrared 8 matches very closely to the lux. The power density and the lux go hand in hand pretty much.
Yeah. Okay. So you'd get a very rapid lux increase and
so what you actually find in nature, find in nature is that the infrared increases first and then the visible light because of air mass, because the sun's passing through more atmosphere, the sunlight is passing through more atmosphere, which you get that red shift effect in the morning and the evenings.
Yep.
I mean, if somebody could replicate that perfectly in captivity, I would give them an award. Because that would be so difficult to replicate, because even dimming up a halogen lamp is shifting the spectrum.
Yep.
Whereas
so what if you had one on timer, so you had like one halogen and then like
you
one
have
one again after to ramp up
5 watt, 10 watt, 15 watt, 20 watt, and then have them turn on in order.
I mean even if it's just like 2, like you just double. I mean that's better than just
stack it on top. Yeah, you could.
Mm.
Do you want to show? Can you see my screen?
Oh, yep. Sorry, I have to add that to the stage.
No, so that's the oh god, I'm there like 10 times.
Wow.
There you go. That's the full power T5, the 6%. That's on 100%. So 6% on 100% is going to be fun to learn to say. Then what's that? 75%. You can see there's quite a big drop. Then 50%. And then the 25, you can sort of see this dip in the middle starting to happen.
Oh, yeah.
And that, if you go further down, that dip becomes more and more and more visual.
Prominent? Yeah.
Yeah, prominent. Yeah.
When you say go down, you mean the percentage of dimming?
So, yeah, so this is 25% dim.
Right, okay.
This one is 50% dim. This one is 75% dim. And then this one is 100% on full power. The 6% lamp, this one.
Just a question on this Luminize. Can you choose the percentage of dimming, or is it set?
Yeah, you can choose it in 1% increments.
Oh, okay.
I don't really want to show all that.
I haven't had it long, so I haven't really figured it out.
You can. I'll stop showing that for now. You can. You can set it in 1% increments. Basically, it's pretty good. There are some obvious, issues that it doesn't. The T5 is not compatible with the lamp guards. So if you have a snake and you use the guards, you can't use.
Yes, the apps on your
phone.
Can't
use it. It's slightly bigger, so it doesn't fit inside the lamp guard anymore. The LED does, but the T5 doesn't. I think logistical thing. It's just fitting all the tech into the box is difficult anyway.
I wish it was compatible with the Thermal Zoo Pro, because of the bigger size of the
It is, right? Is there a
no.
reason it wouldn't be?
Because of the form factor of the height of the old T5.
Yeah.
Like you're literally just like touching like the rim of your.
Oh, because
So because it's taller, it would protrude. Yeah, it would.
The LED would fit.
The LED would fit. Yeah, it's a shame. But then also the holes on the end of your Filmsy Pro are like that, and like that, and your things are like big and bulky like that now. The
It
link
is.
cables.
Yes, that is the LED cable is a twisty cable, isn't it? It's not the same cable anymore. So there's look. I mean, it's a great product, but I have some concerns over beginners using it for sure, and potentially bearded dragons or other animals not quite getting the right UV. I had some concerns over the LED dimming yesterday because I was sat here and I have one over the emerald tree skink, and it's the last light to turn off, and it seemed to just flick off. And I measured it, and between 0% and 1%, it's 277 lux difference. So, which is significant enough for it to be a flash. So the irony of you're no longer flashing all your lights on, you kind of are still, because it's turning from 0 to 277 straight away.
I mean, Liam's one on the desk literally just like turned off, so it's not like it went down.
Yeah, I mean, don't get me wrong. From full power to that, it's quite a smooth dim. But then from 1 to off, it's just an off, and it'll be the same in the morning when it turns on. It's going to be an on to 277 lux, which isn't bright, but it's not a gradual increase. I plotted it on a graph. If people are on the Reptile Lighting Facebook group, you can see the graph. It's like a good ramp up of lux. It is really nice, but the 0 to 1%, annoyingly, the one, it'd be nice if it went from 0 to 0.1 very, very slowly.
I just don't see how it can be used without a solar meter. Fair enough if it's a species that's like not gonna, like a leopard gecko or a snake. Arguably, if I know that the max is a certain UVI, I'm like, I don't really give a shit what percentage the UVI is, because they're not gonna die with, as long as it's not overexposed, and they're not gonna die. But with something like a bearded dragon, it's like, how do you use this product without a solar meter? Unless you do like a quick ramp up to the UVI 4 all day long, and then look the ramp down again. But then again, that's only there to just stop it from like just flashing off like a flashbang. But when it flashes off anyway, because it's dropping down.
Anyway, something I'm going to play around with is Becky, my partner. Her brother has a gargoyle gecko, and we're going to install luminize on it, and but I'm going to buy a either the Mega Ray or the Leap. They have an 8-watt 5.0 lamp or a 10.0 lamp you can even buy. So they have 8-watt, the small lamp, but a higher output. And I'm going to use that, because then what I end up with is a similar to the graph that I showed you before, where the midday is higher. Because currently, if you're providing UVI to a gargoyle gecko, they say UVI 2 max. UVI 2 max would mean he's getting UVI 0.1 at dusk, which is fine. But if we're providing that UVI 2 as an average, if we're trying to replicate sunlight, like we were saying, we should really be bumping that up. So in theory, what we're doing is by doing this is kind of upping the UVI max. It's safe to do so, then you can.
Yeah,
when people
you got to determine what level you're going to ramp it up to. Like,
without a solar meter, you can't. Yeah, you need a solar meter.
And if you're just say we do adjust this. Just say in a perfect world, for a bearded dragon, we're getting the maximum of 10 UVI. Like, then it becomes a safety issue. People putting their skin, looking inside it, doing maintenance in it, stuff like that. Like, it's, technically to replicate nature, you're going to have a peak at 10 to 11. Or if we calculate it, just say we start at plateauing it out at like 7 or 8. That's still quite a lot of UVI,
that was my kind of safe maximum.
But how do you know? How do you know that that's definitely going to be what you need? Like, well, I can tell you how you can do it. You can correlate that with the blood results that I've got for vitamin D. But who's going to?
That's a big
do
job.
That work? Who's going to pay me to do that?
It's a very
Anyone?
complicated project. Yeah.
Christians
I
have
mean-
an abundance of lighting. Sorry.
I was just gonna say, my concern is like if you're providing like a UVI of like 7 or 8 in the wild, they can get away, but it's a box. Like you're just cooking it essentially, unless you're providing like burrows for them to get away in.
Yeah,
And it's
burrows,
like-
plants, stuff like that. Like they do, like in the wild, they're still out, but they're just underneath, shaded underneath bushes and stuff like that. And,
Which I think wouldn't be a problem for mine, because the idea of my enclosure is that I use a low percentage bulb, I use 6%, so that he has to be closer to the bulb to get the UVI. So he can get away just by going down. He has to go up to bask. My bearded dragon. And when he's lower down, he's getting his UVI, 0.5 to 1.5 if he's underneath the lamp at full distance. And of course, he gets away by going left and right across the enclosure as well. So I suppose that would be a way of fixing it, is to lower the percentage but bring everyone's basking sight.
If only Luminous came with a solar meter, eh?
Would Reptile be aware of UVI? This is what Serena said, Christine, is that the irony is that if you can see the UV turning on and off like that, then your enclosure isn't bright enough. If the UV turning on is making you go, bloody hell, it's brighter in here now, then your enclosure isn't bright enough. So yeah, in theory, you shouldn't really notice the UV turning on and off, because the lux from everywhere else is bright, not too bright, but bright enough. So yeah, it's a very good point. Should the reptiles be aware of the UVB turning on and off? No. You could stagger the lights, halogen, LED, UVB, and by the time your UVB turns on, your LED and halogen are already outshining it, so you can't really see when the T5 is on or off. That would be that ruins the idea of ramping up the T5 for anything other than trying to replicate sunlight. And if we are trying to replicate sunlight, then maybe the UVI should be higher.
This is like assuming everyone's got the same distance to the T5s as well. So what's going to happen is you're going to have certain bearded dragon groups. They have their own presets to the luminized lighting, the dimming schedules. They're going to be like, you have to abide by our schedule, and like that loses the nuance of like that person's distance. Whether it climbs a branch, you get to the higher UV. There's so much. They're just, unless you've got it all in here and you're on it, you got all the equipment. Whoosh, you know what I mean?
It's certainly fun, but I don't think it's beginner friendly. The luminized system, I think, for a beginner, on and off is so much easier, because it's just one less thing for them to think about. It's already hard getting them to buy the right bloody T5 rather than a Reptizoo. That's bloody hard enough. Never mind a more expensive one that you have to ramp up and down within time. Oh my god! Why would they do that when they can buy the 50 quid Reptizoo? They buy the 50 quid Reptizoo anyway. Yeah.
What I wonder is what your thoughts are of it claims to have so many health benefits. And like, I can understand where they're suggesting it, but I don't know where they're getting it from, or if everyone agrees that actually it does what it says it does, or if it's just because they're saying it has like a better impact on like their immune system and things
breeding,
like that.
yeah.
And
that is, I'd like to know Jonathan's say on that. But before I let you speak, Jonathan, I'm so sorry. My take on that is an advertising nightmare from an ASA perspective, which is the Advertising Standards Agency, and the CMA, which is the Competition Markets Authority. That is you can't claim stuff like that. You can't. You see, if you watch a deodorant advert on the TV, it says, it helps stop body odor, but then it has like a little asterisk, and there's like, we asked 3,000 people, and there's like all these massive caveats as to
it's like Avawash.
Yeah. Like where they've got these numbers from and where these claims are from. You can't make unsubstantiated claims like that unless they are doing, and they've got the data, which is I'm happy to accept. But I'm surprised that hasn't been hit by someone at Monkfield, which is the owner of Arcadia. Someone at Monkfield, if they have a compliance team, someone there hasn't said, well, can we say this shit? Because that is a claim to be saying that it helps with, but they're saying it helps with breeding and helps with fertility.
And
Now,
immune system, and it's going to give you
it may well do compared to no light at all. But what are they comparing it to? There's nothing.
It's like the presence of UV, yeah, because it does. But the
yeah,
dimming,
the presence of UV will affect fertility, I guess, yeah. But that's not specific to that product. That's just the presence of UV, which is what it should say. It should say all UV does this. In theory, I'm not a legal advertising expert, but my opinion and my understanding of the Advertising Standards Authority in the UK is that it's a bit. Can you make claims like that? I don't know, but I'm sure.
I mean, like, even like a hair shampoo advert has, we are 102 people and 72 people.
Yeah.
Like,
9 out of 10 dentists agree. We asked 10. Like that's the there's always a little caveat.
Get it in. It's just like 9 people in a room.
In any sort of a claim, then you should have where you've got that data from, because otherwise, as much as I agree with it, I'm sure adding UV and adding more visible light does affect hormones and it does affect fertility. But compared to what? You can't just compare it to nothing, because that at that point any lamp would help.
What's your opinion, Jonathan?
So the cues for breeding and hormones is related to daylight length. We know that. So if you adjusted your ramp up and ramp down to certain times of the year, or photo period, so you had it on an on-off switch shorter during certain times, that definitely does cue breeding activity. And that also, levels of cortisone, progesterone, all that stuff is all based on mainly on photo period, what they do know, and it's for humans as well. So there is whether ramping it up and ramping it down makes a difference. I don't know. The UV. So we do know that the UVB, for example, an animal, it won't fluctuate that much during the year other than reproductive activity using up the vitamin D and calcium and stuff like that. But the animals bask differently at different seasons connected to heat. So, it's a ramp shortening or lengthening UVB isn't going to make that much of a difference because, well, if we look in the wild, so springtime, they're basking earlier and longer, whereas in summer, they shift even earlier and shorter because the UVI is so high earlier in the day, they're getting their amount of UV to get their blood levels the same. So it's kind of like, there's an adjustment, as we were saying, the lumens and the UVs all linked and the infrared and stuff. So, so I don't think ramping UV up and down is going to make a massive difference in terms of the health, like that way.
Right, yeah.
But what more concerns me is that they're going to have enough of that UVB available if you're ramping it up so slowly.
I think what we're going to have to do is make like full-blown guides on how to use these dimming products for each species. Like for bearded dragon, you need to go up to like a 7, or if you're going to do like a quick and then a 4 all day long and quick down, or 7, or if it's for like a ball python, like it's going to have to.
Yeah.
But what's that going to be based on? No, you'd have
making
to do.
Sure that it gets
the only evidence
4.
science we've got is the Ferguson zones, and those don't work.
We've got Ferguson zones, which work on averages, which is pretty much a foolproof way to do it, technically. And then the other extreme is to perfectly mimic what the sun does. So your dragon can get higher levels because it's basking, at certain times. Like,
But that's impractical. So it's
everything else in the middle needs to be so if it was my way to go, okay, let's work it out. Okay. Then you would go, okay, let's take bloods from these animals and we have it ramped up to 4. And then in the next group, we have it ramped up to 7, and then we take the blood levels of vitamin D, and then go, okay, what matches nature the best, and then you can make recommendations on it. But then the person goes, oh well, I'm dimming my heat, I'm ramping it up to this at this, and then it throws it all out the window.
Yeah.
Like, you know, or
I'm using the 12%, only around 50% power.
I'm keeping mine in an insulated house, and it doesn't get below 21 degrees at any time of the year, so it's basking, lights on straight first thing, and then, you know, so it's just becomes so complicated.
Yeah,
then,
my concern. Sorry.
Yeah, so once you go even there, like once it starts doing this, you might as well just go, okay, let's give them LED UVB, which has shown to just produce so much more UVB, and just put it lower. You might as well do something like that if you're going to start testing, you know, what the blood levels of vitamin D is. Like,
yeah, the at that point it becomes a
just serum levels. Yeah.
question.
Yeah. So anyway, Ellie, you can go.
Oh no, I was just going to say, my concern is that people are going to try and do the good thing of like buying a product that claims to do healthier things for them, and you're going to get metabolic bone disease appearing despite them spending the money on a really good product, just because it's not doing. There's just no way of them reading how to do it properly or correctly.
Could. Don't get me in trouble.
I've spoken to Arcadia. They've said they've been using it with bearded dragons for 2 years, and their bearded dragons are fine. And the one thing that everyone has said is that the color of their animals is better. I mean, if that is the case, that's cool. But I also worry about this concept of, are they not just changing colour so they can absorb more quicker? Is that not what's happening?
Well, from brown to red.
It's all going all black.
That's the dragon that died and been replaced.
Yeah.
I'm joking.
It's a different dragon. It's become a 0 overnight. It's really weird.
Wow.
Yeah, but what you're saying, Ellie, is like, it's a massive problem. Like, people got advertising, and then, like, you hear of people installing, I'm going to buy buy this awesome T5, and then they install it on top of glass or something, and then nothing comes through, or it's all got all, they're gonna have to be guided through it, and then companies claim that stuff with pets all the time. Like, it's I think it's up to us vets, people on Facebook, making sure that we have the right information and it all filters down. We can't control everything. We just need to provide the science, and hopefully they believe it. And rather than trying to sell a product, it's just like anything. Or I guess people will say things to sell any product, and people have to make that judgment. And hopefully we can give them that with good factual based evidence, and they can make a decision from there.
Do you think the morphs are going to have an impact? So if you've got like a trans bearded dragon, would you not ramp it up to 7?
So we do know from a scientific point of view is that, so there was a paper done, and they said that these, not so much morphs, but, well, it is a morph, but not with it's like the leatherbacks and stuff, they lost water faster, their water requirements are higher, but their temperature requirement was exactly the same. So, which is obvious, like, you need to get them to the preferred optimal body temperature. Does the extra keratin on a normal beardy block more UV? I don't know. I haven't seen the science. So at the moment with the Ferguson zones, it's safe. Like, you can give it, if the scale's a bit, it's at 4. Like, let's be honest, a UVI of 4 is like, 9:30 in the morning in Australia. It's like, it's nothing compared to what a wild dragon. So that's quite safe. So it's not going to make a big difference there, I think, but once we start ramping up the UV eyes to, if we just say we mimic the sun and it goes up to 11 or 12, then maybe we start seeing problems. Maybe we start seeing more skin cancers, or, you know, if they're basking early, we don't see it. Like, you know, let's see what happens. There is some anecdotal things that people post on certain Facebook groups that, oh, we're seeing more cancers because, you know, people are using too high UV, blah, blah, blah. It's like they get higher UVB. The Ferguson zone is very, when I say tame, is very conservative, put it that way.
Yes, yeah, good word.
It's very conservative. I wouldn't expect them, if people are providing it at Ferguson zones, that you would have, you know, certain types of cancers and stuff like that. What I would say is with the morphs, we're getting, so when you have morphs, you get people are inbreeding suppression, so more chances of cancers, more chances of immune problems, stuff like that. So, you know, so they're going to have things where they're not as robust as a wild one. So I think that's where you're getting increases of cancers and problems there. That would be more sensitive to UV, even though it's a normal level of UV for them. So.
See, now I don't know what I want to do, because I'm going to have 5 7-foot vids behind me, and I need to fully light them all. And I was going to be like, I'll get like all luminized and go full shebang. But now, am I doing that for the animal, or am I doing that because I think it's cool to see it all dim and dim off, and that's literally the only reason that I want to do it? You know what I mean?
Yeah, like, let's think about it. Like bearded dragon, summertime, they're sleeping out in the open. They're in bushes, on trees and stuff. Springtime, they're in a burrow. Once it gets warm enough, they go from pretty much darkness in a burrow to kabam. It's lights on. Now, is it stressing them out that much? I don't know. And unless you're like ramping up to, you know, 100,000 lumens, like it is in full sun, I don't know. I don't know whether it's really.
Yeah, this is the point that the advertising and the marketing campaign has kind of said that, incorrectly, they've said that we're turning from nothing to full sun levels, and we're not. We're turning from nothing to if you measure 4,000 lux in an enclosure that's got a T5 and a halogen, 4,000 lux is like early morning levels. So like you're turning from off to early morning levels is what you're doing. You're not turning from off to full sun at all. Full sun would be 120,000 lux, UVI 10, UVI 12, you know, the full brightness, which would be hella shocking, and I imagine would be very stressful. I did notice in the advertising for the product, they didn't say reduces stress, they said reduces stressors, ORS in the end, stresses. And they could say that, because they could say that turning a lamp on is a stressor, and thus you're reducing a stressor.
With a bearded dragon, right? Obviously, they get into a circadian rhythm. They know that their day cycles and stuff. Typically, mine goes to bed and is like already got their head tucked away somewhere and is just half asleep.
Well, before your lamps go off. Yeah.
Before the lamps go off, anyway.
Yeah. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. My Emerald Tree Skink has been the same. I've had him about a week and a bit now, and it's to say he burrows at nighttime before the lights go off, and then he only comes out at about midday, 1 o'clock anyway. So I'm buying all this stuff. I'm ramping lights. I'm getting them on a thing where the lights turn on in order. So I'm building up the brightness slowly. He doesn't notice it.
He's on the ground.
He's on the bloody ground. Do I? And I'm not for a moment saying don't buy luminides and don't do this because it's cool. Because it is cool.
It is really cool.
That's not what's going on. But it is a bit like should I have spent the extra, whatever the price difference is, £20, £30? Should I have spent that, or should I have spent that £20, £30 on other stuff for the enclosure, or giving it to charity? I don't know. For another animal,
give it to charity.
Buying more animals.
Yeah, I think like I'm tempted to, because I'm buying everything brand new, and it's like, why not? But if I already had it all, and I say would I upgrade, I'm like, no, I wouldn't upgrade. If I'd have got it all last week before it was all announced and before Luminize was like publicly announced, if I had set up all my 7 foots with like just their current like T5s and juggernauts and whatnot, I would not upgrade. But because I'm buying new, I'm tempted.
Well, this is the thing: is it's not a bad product, right? And you have the choice to turn it on 100% at midday anyway. So it's not like it's, you know, if you have the chance to get it for the same price as the other one, then why the hell not? You may as well. You've got the options.
Yeah. Everyone's
But
bullying me in the chat. I don't like it.
Yeah, you're being bullied. The issue you may face, and I know we've spoken about this with the guard, is that it might not be suitable for a lot of people with snakes because it doesn't fit in the lamp guard anymore. So if you've got a UVB system for a snake, you'll need to rethink how you guard it from the snake or snake from the lamp, if you like, because it doesn't fit anymore. So I imagine they'll come out with compatible units at some point, but for now it's not compatible anymore.
Yeah.
Which is an issue if you've got a snake that likes to climb on lamps, which I have. So I literally can't swap it because he'll just wrap himself around the lamp. There is a good thing. How did you find the clamp pull UV tube, pull the ends of the tube for the T5?
What to do it?
Yeah.
Change. I hated it. It's just as someone who is actually like has a disability, and I'm cack-handed as it is, right? The claim that it was for disabled people actually really upset me, not gonna lie.
Have you seen it, Jonathan? Have you?
I saw a bit about it. I thought it was like, you know, it's a good idea having it like that because my sprayers go on my chameleon and it's very close to that UV. And that, if anything, I'm worried about because the UV is sitting on the mesh.
Yeah.
It's like, you know, it's like, mate, if water gets in that, it's cooked. So
I see it in two halves. So I like doing the twisty of the old stuff whilst you're in an enclosure, whilst there's like a croc monitor, or when I worked in a shop, or there's like a king snake trying to eat you. I find that really difficult. Doing that like on a table, I've got all the time in the world. It's really easy. Just put that in, twist, right? So being able to take that stuff out now, and it's like the two ends, they come out, and then I can change the thing. That's because I can take it away then, and it's like bong. So putting it in once it's in is really easy. But the other half of it is lining up the. It's like going back to the LT8 days. Yeah, the LT8s, right? I used to really struggle with them, right? So I used to kind of like just drop them in and just gently like twist till I felt the pins come up a little bit, and I can pop it in. But because it's got the waterproofing and it grips it, and it's like sucking on it, because I'm trying, you can't do it because you have to like to get it to move because of gripping. I can't do that. I really struggled.
Yeah,
I had to get someone else to like have a go at one point.
Something that is interesting is I don't know if any of you deal with tegus a lot, but something that happens with tegus, mine has done it once, but he's not done it for a long time now. But something that happens with tegus is they pull the T5s out if you don't have a cage over them. Like, this is really common on the tegu groups. Is people will came back from work today and look, and the T5 is just on the floor, like the tube has been pulled out. So the tegus will, and I don't know why, the tegus will jump and attack the T5 tube and pull it out. Now, it can't do that in the new one, so that's quite good. Jess, who runs one of the tegu groups, has kind of designed like a mesh thing to just go over the ends. It's not a full mesh, so it doesn't block out loads of light, but just to go over the ends to stop it from being pulled out and all that sort of stuff. So I showed her the new thing and said that this might finally fix the tegu issue, but it's like, it's such a strange... it's a positive for tegu people, I think. But it's
overall it is better because the waterproofing and like it can't come out and stuff. And I'm bitching and whining about how difficult it is for me to do it as like me. But realistically, I have to do it once a year. So quit your whining, Liam. But yeah, it's once a year. Struggle for 20 minutes, effing and blinding once a year. It's not that bad.
Yeah,
for the waterproofing
I
yeah,
thought it was a bit. I certainly didn't think it was immediately intuitive, but now I know how it works. I'm sure I can figure it out going forward. Yeah. But, you know, that's the learning curve, I guess. Learning curve is very quick. It's interesting. We need to get you some, Jonathan, so you can have a play.
Yeah,
we're an interesting. It's an interesting lamp. Have you got yours on a mesh, Liam?
Yeah, it's over a Habitat.
Does it feel like rocking? Is it rocking or is it okay?
Yeah, well, the not the Jungle Dawn,
No,
but literally it's like a rocking chair, like a
yeah, it
rocking
is. Yeah.
horse
So
on
if
top
it's
of it.
flat on a mesh, it doesn't sit flat anymore. It rocks back and forth. It's got like 2 points that are lower than the rest of it, and it hinges on them. Bit annoying.
It only does it if I move it, because it rests like
In position,
vertically.
it can rock.
fine.
Yeah. There's some strange design things going on. I think that's the clasps that do that, isn't it? The 2 little clasps that you pull out. That's what it's rocking on.
Yeah, it does. Yeah.
It's an interesting
So
one.
we've been going for 2 hours and a half now.
Yeah.
I think let's give it a bit of Q&A time for 15 minutes or so. We'll give people a chance to just bombard probably Jonathan with questions.
Okay,
And then we'll
I
call
had
it
some
a night,
questions
probably.
for Jonathan.
Ooh.
I'll start with those because I said if I get the chance I will bring them up. Water for a bearded dragon. Hit me.
Give it what?
Do bearded dragons need water? 3, 2, 1. Yes.
Yeah, you might as well give them water. So, out in the wild, yes, it's an arid region. If it rains, so bearded dragons will actually stand out in the rain and will curve their tails up and will let water run down them to get water. But most of their water comes from eating herbage and insects. One way when I used to keep them is I used to go down every 2 or 3 days, just get a sprayer and spray them, and they'll sit there. I had rocks in there, so if little puddle forms in a rock, they'll just start licking out of that, stuff like that. And they seem to like that. Not so much a big bowl or anything like that, but you just need to make sure they're hydrated, just like any species. But at the same time, they're getting a lot, especially if you're feeding them lots of greens, especially the greens that we feed them, has a lot more moisture content than the wild greens have. So, they're going to be getting heaps of water in that as well. And a lot of people looking at them going, oh, it's dehydrated because, the poops, aren't runny. Like the poop in the wild is, pretty compact. They've sucked out most of the moisture out of it. Very urine part of it, of the urates as well. So, but they need water. How they get it, they're much more effective at getting it out of their food. And, well, we know, as we mentioned before, your leatherbacks are going to lose moisture more. So, you're just going to have to make sure you're monitoring them and giving them water a bit more. So,
there is one more before we jump on 20 that are coming in. Just I'm kidding them while I can. Do we have any proof behind overfeeding being a reason for infertile eggs being produced in captivity?
Have any proof? So,
sorry, rather than proof.
So, if we look at arid species, they're boom or bust cycle species. We got our avian reptiles, birds, for example. It's been proven excess calories causes them to start egg laying. If we look at when their goal in the wild is to reproduce as much as they can. And when there is an excess of calories other than their basic metabolic needs, they start shifting it to that reproductive cycle. And in all animals, you look at, even in mammals, we look at what cues reproduction, and it's an excess of calories. You look at humans, girls, athletic females, where they're, high calorie content, burning, they stop their ovulation cycles. So we know that as soon as there is available energy, they go into a reproductive mode. So excess feeding, especially you know, in these boom or bust is going to override the normal system. They need to start trying to reproduce, and it overrides and starts this cycle of a reproductive cycle pretty much in them. So, and with all these egg laying, you know, whether it be birds, reptiles, it starts them to produce and ovulate and go through the whole shell process. If it goes normally, but because it's not natural, there's a high chance of problems, dystocia, egg binding, follicular stasis, stuff like that. And that's been well documented in not only bearded dragons, birds, which are, you know, reptiles as well, when you think about it. And then it even happens quite frequently in snakes.
Interesting.
People push it for a double clutch, yeah.
Okay,
yeah,
yeah,
but
so
I had a lot of clients who had like little children's pythons and, you know, fat children's pythons. Next minute, yeah, it's not eating. It's like, oh, I don't know what's going on. Like, you know, and the next minute it's just pumping out infertile eggs. And it's just like, wow. Like, you know, and then this is how you get, like, you know, you're getting like Komodo dragons producing, you know, non-mated Komodo dragons or non-mated ball pythons and stuff. You know, it's a way for nature to populate, you know, especially like, you know, if you look throughout, yeah, that's it, Jurassic Park type stuff.
Bang on.
But you look at like, you know, some of these species like boas in Papua New Guinea, which is boas are New World and Papua New Guinea is Old World, and it's just like these animals have floated across the Pacific and then land. You know, this is possibly they could have made use of abundant food source and then bang, parthenogenesis. So
that's how they happen. Oh. Yeah,
and then you got the add-on there from Corey.
And people feed pinkies after lay eggs. Oh yeah, this is
the pain.
Yeah.
It's much better to feed them, you know, to get the condition back on, to feed them a well-balanced diet and slowly increase it, rather than suddenly go have all these calories and then.
You know, I've got this issue with, I've got some Pristerus carteri, some scorpion tail geckos, and I've had them separated from the females, separated from the males for a while now, and they're still producing fertile eggs. Like, it's been like 5 months, so they're holding sperm, and there's some literature to show that they can hold sperm for about a year, and they're holding sperm, and I'm terrified of them just dying. So I'll like feed them, and then they'll lay, and then I'm like, oh, do I keep feeding them because they've just lost all these calories, or? And I'm slowly, I mean, they're down to like 2 feeds a week, right? So it's not, I'm not feeding them loads, but they're still laying so many eggs, and I'm so worried about them just losing condition, and they're so difficult to weigh because they're tiny. But
yeah.
It's I can see why people would get into that sort of, because I'm in the same situation. I'm currently feeding 2 times a week, and I'm worried if it's not enough. Because normally I feed them 2 times a week, but now they're producing eggs every week and a half. Like,
and they're losing condition. Yeah, because their body's just telling them pump it out. So
it's unbelievable.
And it's hard. And like, you know, the unique thing about some of these species is, well, like bearded dragons is they've got a developing layer of follicles.
Yeah.
And while that's developing and growing, there's already another set coming through.
Yeah, it's like layers of teeth, isn't it? Just
because they're just cued to, you know, make use of the boom or bust cycle, and you know the food's there, go for it. So,
wow, is this one for DHP or this one products in a bin? So DHP is the Arcadia carbon filament lamp, the deep heat projector, but there's plenty of others from all the other brands. They all work the same way. I wouldn't necessarily say in the bin. I would say if you have one, you can certainly keep it as a backup lamp. If you're in an emergency and you need a heat lamp, then yes. And they can work well as an overnight heater in certain circumstances, but they're not a basking lamp. Do not use a deep heat projector or other carbon filament heat projector lamp as a basking lamp under any circumstances. Leopard geckos, don't bother. crested geckos, don't bother. Use an incandescent, standard incandescent halogen lamp, low wattage for something like that. Heat projector, they can work for a nighttime heater, whereas ceramic heat emitter isn't really appropriate. I tend to say, as a general rule, that if your lamp is above a mesh, then a heat projector is probably better than a ceramic heat emitter, because ceramic heat emitters emit and it kind of goes everywhere, whereas a heat projector at least sends it down. If your heater is in the enclosure, then a ceramic heat emitter is loads cheaper, so just get that, because you're still putting in 100 watts or whatever it is. You're putting in the energy no matter what. It's going into the enclosure. The irony is that a heat projector produces a hell of a lot of infrared C as well. A lot of it is infrared C. It's about 50% infrared C, about that anyway. So I tend to say if your lamp is above a mesh, send the heat into the enclosure with a heat projector rather than a ceramic heat emitter.
I've got a lot of dust under my bed, and they're really good for just collecting it in one spot.
Collecting dust, yeah, they're really good for that. If you've got a few empty boxes on the shelf and you just need to be full of stuff, then just put your heat projectors in there.
Just to weigh the boxes down in case they fall over, you know?
They're really good in the boxes. They're really good. No, they're fine. They're just not basking heaters. It's one of those big issues. They're good for heating an enclosure if it needs it and a ceramic heat emitter isn't working. But my caveat to that is if you're having to use a ceramic heat emitter at night in a house, then I'd reconsider your house temperature, and I'd reconsider whether you're correct in your recommended temperatures, because a lot of times houses get down to 15 Celsius at nighttime-ish. At least my house does. 15 at night. Most animals are fine at 15 at night. I can't think of any animals that really need supplemental heat at all, more than 15 degrees, unless anybody has any other. My bearded dragon is fine at 15, as far as I'm concerned.
Shall we? Here's the next question. Let's save Tom. Here you go, Tom.
Another one. You're saving me. Okay. My question is to you guys: do you have any animals that you don't think would be fine at 15 at night?
Well, when
I think some of
the
tropical ones.
Okay, maybe, yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't. So, I guess we had a lot of some of the tropical carpet python species and stuff like that. I have a lot of clients that had them in sheds in Australia, and the temperatures are getting out to 12 degrees and stuff like that.
Okay.
And these animals won't see below 19-degree air temperatures
in the wild. Okay.
Yeah. So, and then they were getting a lot of septic skin sores.
Yeah.
Like that, so.
Okay.
But
so
but a lot of those ones at sea level into the tropical areas where it just doesn't get to 15 degrees, or it rarely does. And if it did get to 15 degrees, they usually hold up somewhere where it's not getting to that extreme.
For a very extreme 1 day a year sort of thing.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. That's not an animal I keep. So.
Yeah. But beardies are fine. Like I think a lot of problems we had. Remember how I said that, if the nighttime temperatures are getting below 30, then they're like not basking. They're not coming out to bask, but it's kind of like a graduated thing. If the nighttime temperatures are 25 and stuff, they don't have to bask as long in the morning. And a lot of the times they won't bask as long because that's chewing up energy for them. They're burning more calories. Mm-hmm. Whereas if you get them down to that colder temperature, they bask for longer, get the UV for the appropriate time. So it's beneficial to get their nighttime temperatures down, because none of these reptiles want to be kept warm all the time. It means they have to chew through more energy, and stresses them more if they're constantly at that higher temperature. Because that's the whole point. They evolved to be ectotherms, so they could save energy. It's their evolution. So getting them down to appropriate temperatures at night for beardies is something that promotes proper basking during the day for UV, thermoregulation, immune system, all that stuff like that.
I'm lucky that I live in the UK, and our houses are designed to get warm and stay warm. So our houses are pretty well insulated generally, and it's a new build of my house as well, so it's really well insulated. It doesn't really get any lower than 15 ever. So I'm pretty lucky in that sense. But in terms of answering that question, yes, a deep heat projector could work in a situation like that. However, if it's in an enclosed space, then you may be better in a ceramic heat emitter.
In terms of the question, which was brumation in captivity, how necessary is it? I don't think anyone's studied it. Just naturally, you do go through, changes in daylight length with which reptiles detect, and it gives them somewhat seasonality to it. I think if you kept them cranking hot summer temperatures the whole time without any change in daylight length, which they could detect, it might have something negative effect, but after how long? I don't know. When we talk about wild bearded dragons, they live for what, maybe 4 years at the most. So 4 years in captivity, would you see the negative effects? Whereas in captivity, some of them are living now to 18, 19 years. You might start seeing negative things. Yeah, it's hard to say. If we look at some smaller species of dragons, some of them burn out pretty quick, but then again, they only live 1 year in the wild anyway. So, I don't know. I think what's more important is the day-night temperature differences rather than keeping them too warm at night, which is going to have a massive impact on them. And that's enough variation for them because, unless you actually live in the tropics, you're going to get a variation, which would somewhat simulate that brumation.
I think we'll move on to one last question because I said 15 minutes, we've gone 20 now. So, femoral pause.
Can you go over femoral pause and explain the actual clogged pores are versus pores that get a little out of control and when to intervene? So, the femoral pause, it's a waxy substance, which we think it's to do with like scent marking, marking territories, and signaling through pheromones. I'll be honest, generally we didn't have that much of a problem with it in Australia. I know it's from, like, I got a lot of vet friends who work in the UK, and they're always messaging me all the time, like, femoral pores are affected or overgrown, and it's like, what are they doing in the UK different to what
but our dragons.
It could be, a lot of the time it's a lot of the time when things like this go abnormal, they get infected, is due to incorrect temperatures, high moisture levels. So when I say moisture levels, I don't mean like air humidity, I mean like moisture levels on the ground, type thing. Not enough rough substances to rub it on. They're keeping them on
tile,
paper towel, or lino or something like that. And also the substance in it and the stuff that comes out has got partially keratinized as well. We do know that animals with liver damage produces really poor levels of keratin's a protein. So they produce excessive amounts of this really poor keratin, which can lead to, this extra growth type thing. Yeah. So, I do notice that in other parts of the world, there is this weird sense that a bearded dragon is this fat, pudgy thing, which is, they're lean animals. But in other parts of the world, it's like Labradors. If you see a skinny Labrador, you're like, what type of dog's that? Because you're so used to seeing fat ones. But I think it could be to do with that as well. So
yeah, they've pretty much all got like fatty liver disease, right? Like
pretty much. It's hard. Like you send off a liver sample to any pathology lab, and every bearded dragon has fatty liver disease. And I don't know whether that's because of the lifestyle which they have, which is so abundant in captivity, or reptiles just, there is somewhat fat storage in liver higher than normal. I've been in contact with an exotics vet's researching a lot of fatty liver disease, not only in bearded dragons, but also birds and stuff, because it's a common condition in birds as well.
It is, yeah, it is.
And he was saying he was wanting to get some wild samples of the liver just to compare it to captive, so we could kind of try to work it out, because but also he's saying that if we compare things like birds get affected by fatty liver a lot worse than what we're seeing bearded dragons seem to handle that fatty liver, and whether it's because they're a boom or bust cycle, as in during good times they'll just eat and store fat everywhere and be able to deal with it better. But we definitely do see some issues with the liver in bearded dragons, but just not as pronounced as we would in something like birds or something like that.
Interesting.
Well, we've hit the 3-hour mark, so only an hour less than last time, Jonathan. Yeah, so thank you everyone for sticking. We've basically held like 50 viewers for like 3 hours, dropping now because everyone knows that we're finishing up and everyone's dropping all of a sudden. But we've held 50 people.
They haven't stuck around for the giveaway of the Luminized thing.
Yeah.
Oh, look, it's
giving
gone up
away
to
all
50
his
again.
belongings. You missed it. Right. Thank you everyone for watching. Thank you, you two, for humouring us for 3 hours. I mean, it's been quite well, will we do another Q&A? Well, it depends if we haven't traumatized these two enough or not.
Yeah.
I do this every day because it's so funny. I love the stupid question. I think I could do one of these every day about a different animal. I think probably because my answer would be the same every time, so it's great.
I just have to be able to fit it in with the time schedule.
Yeah.
The allotted 3 hours every day. Right. Everyone's saying thank you. Thank you everyone so much for coming.
Thank you very much for coming. 50
people for 3 hours. Because you've got these two titans in a live stream. Wouldn't we be able to hold us on our own?
Been good. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. We're going to end the live stream in 3, 2, 1.